Chapter 10, Their Own Petard. In a lofty, spacious room of the town hall at Taunton sat Sir Edward Phelps and Colonel Luttrell to dispense justice, and with them, flanked by one of them on either side of him, sat Christopher Monk, Duke of Albemarle, Lord Lieutenant of Devonshire, who had been summoned in all haste from Exeter that he might be present at an examination which promised to be of so vast importance. The three sat at a long table at the room's end, attended by two secretaries. Before them, guarded by constable and tithing men weaponless, their hands pinioned behind them, Blake's arm was healed by now, stood Mr. Westmacott and his friend Sir Rowland to answer this grave charge. Richard, not knowing who might have betrayed him and to what extent, was very fearful, having through his connection with the cause every reason so to be. Blake, on the other hand, conscious of his innocence of any plotting, was impatient of his position and a thought contemptuous. It was he who, upon being ushered by the constable and his men into the august presence of the Lord Lieutenant, clamored to know precisely of what he was accused, that he might straightway clear himself. Albemarle reared his great massive head, smothered in a mighty black peruke, and scowled upon the florid London beau. A black-visaged gentleman was Christopher Monk. His pendulous cheeks, it is true, were of a sallow pallor, but what with his black wig, black eyebrows, dark eyes, and the blue-black tint of shaven beard on his great jaw and upper lip, he presented an appearance somberly sinister. His nether lip was thick and very prominent. Deep creases ran from the corners of his mouth down his heavy chin. His eyes were dull and lackluster, with great pouches under them. In the main, the air of the son of the great parliamentarian general was stupid, dull, unprepossessing. The creases of his mouth deepened as Blake protested against what he termed this outrage that had been done him. He sneered ponderously, thrusting further forward his heavily undershot jowl. "We are informed, sir, of your antecedents," he staggered Blake by answering. "We have learnt the reason why you left London and your creditors, and in all my life, sir, I have never known a man more ready to turn his hand to treason than a broken gamester. Your kind turns by instinct to such work as this, as a last resource of mending of battered fortunes." Blake crimsoned from chin to brow. "I'm for judge, it seems," he made answer haughtily, tossing his fair locks, his blue eyes glaring upon his judges. "May I, at least, know the name of my accuser?" "You shall receive impartial justice at our hands," put in Phelps, whose manner was of a dangerous mildness. "Depend on that. Not only shall you know the name of your accuser, but you shall be confronted by him. Meanwhile, sirs," and his glance strayed from Blake's flushed and angry countenance to Richard's, pale and timid. "Meanwhile, are we to understand that you deny the charge?" "I have heard none as yet," said Sir Rowland insolently. Albemarle turned to one of the secretaries. "Read them the indictment," said he, and sank back in his chair, his dull glance upon the prisoners, whilst the clerk in a droning voice read from a document which he took up. It impeached Sir Rowland Blake and Mr. Richard Westmacott of holding treasonable communication with James Scott, Duke of Monmouth, and of plotting against His Majesty's life and throne and the peace of His Majesty's realms. Blake listened with unconcealed impatience to farrago of legal phrases, and snorted contemptuously when the reading came to an end. Albemarle looked at him darkly. "I do thank God," said he, "that through Mr. Westmacott's folly has this hideous plot, this black and damnable treason, been brought to light in time to enable us to stamp out this fire ere it is well kindled. Have you aught to say, sir?" "I have to say that the whole charge of foul and unfounded lie," said Sir Rowland bluntly. "I never plotted in my life against anything but my own prosperity, nor against any man but myself." Albemarle smiled coldly at his colleagues, then turned to Westmacott. "And you, sir," he said, "are you as stubborn as your friend?" "I incontinently deny the charge," said Richard, and he contrived that his voice should ring bold and resolute. "A charge built on air," sneered Blake, "which the first breath of truth should utterly dispel. We have heard the impeachment. Will your grace, with the same consideration, permit us to see the proofs that we may lay bare their falseness? It should not be difficult." "Do you say there is no such plot as is here alleged?" quoth the Duke, and smote a paper sharply. Blake shrugged his shoulders. "How should I know?" he asked. "I say I have no share in any, that I am acquainted with none." "Call Mr. Trenchard," said the Duke quietly, and an usher who had stood tamely by the door at the far end of the room departed on the errand. Richard started at the mention of that name. He had a singular dread of Mr. Trenchard. Colonel Luttrell, lean and wiry, now addressed the prisoners, Blake more particularly. "Still," said he, "you will admit that such a plot may indeed exist?" "It may indeed, for aught I know or care," he added incautiously. Albemarle smote the table with a heavy hand. "By God!" he cried in that deep, booming voice of his, "there spoke a traitor. You do not care, you say. What plots may be hatched against His Majesty's life and crown? Yet you ask me to believe you a true and loyal subject." Blake was angered. He was at best a short-tempered man. Deliberately, he floundered further into the mire. "I have not asked your grace to believe me anything," he answered hotly. "It is all one to me what your grace believes me. I take it, I have not been fetched hither to be confronted with what your grace believes. You have preferred a lying charge against me. I ask for proofs, not your grace's beliefs and opinions." "By God! Sir, you are a daring rogue," cried Albemarle. Sir Rowland's eyes blazed. "Anon, your grace, when, having failed of your proofs, you shall be constrained to restore me to liberty, I shall ask your grace to unsay that word." Albemarle stared, confounded, and in that moment the door opened, and Trenchard sauntered in, cane in hand, his hat under his arm, a wicked smile on his wizen face. Leaving Blake's veiled threat unanswered, the Duke turned to the old rake. "These rogues," said he, pointing to the prisoners, "demand proofs ere they will admit the truth of the impeachment." "Those proofs," said Trenchard, "are already in your grace's hands." "Aye, but they have asked to be confronted with their accuser." Trenchard bowed. "Is it your wish, then, that I recite for them the counts on which I have based the accusation I laid before your grace?" "If you will condescend so far," said Albemarle. "Blister me!" roared Blake, when the Duke interrupted him. "By God, sir," he cried, "I'll have no such disrespectful language here. You'll observe the decency of speech and forbear from profanities, you damned rogue, or by God, I'll commit you forthwith." "I will endeavor," said Blake, with a sarcasm lost on Albemarle, "to follow your grace's lofty example." "You will do well, sir," said the Duke, and was shocked that Trenchard should laugh at such a moment. "I was about to protest, sir," said Blake, "that it is monstrous I should be accused by Mr. Trenchard. He has but the slightest acquaintance with me." Trenchard bowed to him across the chamber. "Admitted, sir," said he. "What should I be doing in bad company?" An answer this that set Albemarle bawling with laughter. Trenchard turned to the Duke. "I will begin, and it please your grace, with the expressions used last night in my presence at the Bell Inn at Bridgewater by Mr. Richard Westmacott, and I will confine myself strictly to those matters on which my testimony can be corroborated by that of other witnesses." Colonel Luttrell interrupted him to turn to Richard. "Do you recall those expressions, sir?" he asked him. Richard winced under the question. Nevertheless, he braced himself to make the best defense he could. "I have not yet heard," said he, "what those expressions were, nor when I hear them must it follow that I recognize them as my own. I must admit to having taken more wine, perhaps, than, whilst he sought the expression that he needed, Trenchard cut in with a laugh. "In vino veritas, gentlemen," and his grace and Sir Edward nodded sagely. Luttrell preserved a stolid exterior. He seemed less prone than his colleagues to forejudging. "Will you repeat the expressions used by Mr. Westmacott?" Sir Edward begged. "I will repeat the one that, to my mind, matters most." Mr. Westmacott, getting to his feet, and in a loud voice exclaimed, "God save the Protestant Duke!" "Do you admit it, sir?" thundered Albemarle. His eyes glowering upon Richard hesitated a moment, pale and trembling. "You will waste breath in denying it," said Trenchard suavely, "for I have a drawer from the Bell Inn, and two gentlemen who overheard you waiting outside." "I faith, sir," cried Blake, "what treason was there in that? If he—" "Silence!" thundered Albemarle. "Let Mr. Westmacott speak for himself." Richard, inspired by the defense Blake had begun, took the same line of argument. "I admit that in the heat of wine I may have used such words," said he, "but I deny their intent to be treasonable. There are many men who drink to the prosperity of the late king's son." "Natural son, sir, natural son," Albemarle amended. "It is treason to speak of him otherwise." "It will be a treason presently to draw breath," sneered Blake. "If it be," said Trenchard, "it is a treason you'll not be long committing." "Faith, you are right, Mr. Trenchard," said the Duke with a laugh. Indeed, he found Mr. Trenchard a most pleasant and facetious gentleman. "Still," insisted Richard, endeavoring in spite of these irrelevancies to make good his point, "there be many men who drink daily to prosperity of the late king's natural son." "Aye, sir," answered Albemarle, "but not his prosperity in horrid plots against the life of our beloved sovereign." "True, your grace, very true," purred Sir Edward. "It was not so I meant to toast him," cried Richard. Albemarle made an impatient gesture and took up a sheet of paper. "How, then," he asked, "comes this letter? This letter which makes plain the treason upon which the Duke of Monmouth is embarked, just as it makes plain your participation in it. How comes this letter to be found in your possession?" And he waved the letter in the air. Richard went the color of ashes. He faltered a moment, then took refuge in the truth, for all that he knew beforehand that the truth was bound to ring more false than any lie he could invent. "That letter was not addressed to me," he stammered. Albemarle read the subscription, "To my good friend W. at Bridgewater." He looked up, a heavy sneer thrusting his heavy lips still further out. "What do you say to that? Does not W stand for Westmacott?" "It does not." "Of course not," said Albemarle with heavy sarcasm. "It stands for Wilkins or Williams, Oregon or what not." "Indeed, I can bear witness that it does not," exclaimed Sir Rowland. "Be silent, sir, I tell you," bawled the Duke at him again. "You shall bear witness soon enough, I promise you." "To whom, then," he resumed, turning again to Richard, "do you say that this letter was addressed?" "To Mr. Wilding, Mr. Anthony Wilding," Richard answered. "I would have your grace to observe," put in Trenchard quietly, "that Mr. Wilding, properly speaking, does not reside in Bridgewater." "Tush!" cried Albemarle. "The rogue but mentions the first name of the W that occurs to him. He's not even an ingenious liar." "And how, sir," he asked Richard, "does it come to be in your possession, having been addressed, as you say, to Mr. Wilding?" "Aye, sir," said Sir Edward, blinking his weak eyes. "Tell us that." Richard hesitated again and looked at Blake, who by now had come to realize that his friend's affairs were not mended by his interruptions, moodily shrugged his shoulders, scowling. "Come, sir," said Colonel Luttrell engagingly, "answer the question." "Aye," roared Albemarle, "let your invention have free rein." Again poor Richard sought refuge in the truth. "We, Sir Rowland here and I, had reason to suspect that he was awaiting such a letter." "Tell us your reasons, sir, if we are to credit you," said the Duke, and it was plain he mocked the prisoner. It was, moreover, a request that staggered Richard. Still, he sought to find a reason that should sound plausible. "We inferred it from certain remarks that Mr. Wilding let fall in our presence." "Tell us the remarks, sir," the Duke insisted. "Indeed, I do not call his precise words to mind, your grace, but they were such that we suspicioned him. And you would have me believe that hearing words which awoke in you such grave suspicions, you kept your suspicions and straightway forgot the words. You're but an indifferent liar." Trenchard, who was standing by the long table, leaned forward now. "It might be well, and it please your grace," said he, "to waive the point, and let us come to those matters which are of greater moment. Let him tell your grace how he came by the letter." "Aye," said Albemarle, "we do but waste time. Tell us, then, how came the letter into your hands?" "With Sir Rowland. Here, I robbed the courier as he was riding from Taunton to Bridgewater." Albemarle laughed, and Sir Edward smiled. "You robbed him, eh?" said his grace. "Very well. But how did it happen that you knew he had the letter upon him? Or was it that you were playing the Hydo-Byman, and that in robbing him you hoped to find other matters?" "Not so, sir," answered Richard. "I saw but the letter." "And how knew you that he carried it? Did you learn that, too, from Mr. Wilding's indiscretion?" "Your grace has said it." "Slife, what an impudent rogue have we here!" cried the angry Duke, who conceived that Richard was purposely dealing in effrontery. "Mr. Trenchard, I do think we are wasting time. Be so good as to confound them both with the truth of this matter." "That letter," said Trenchard, "was delivered to them at the Hare and Hounds, here at Taunton, by a gentleman who put up at the inn, and was there joined by Mr. Westmacott and Sir Rowland Blake. They opened the conversation with certain cant phrases very clearly intended as passwords. Thus, the prisoner said to the messenger, as they seated themselves at the table he occupied, "You have the air, sir, of being from overseas," to which the courier answered, "Indeed, yes. I am from Holland, from the land of Orange," says one of the prisoners. "Aye, and other things," replies the messenger. "There's a fair wind blowing," he adds, to which one of the prisoners, I believe it was Sir Rowland, makes answer, "May it prosper the Protestant Duke and blow popery to hell." Thereupon the landlord caught some mention of a letter, but these plotters, perceiving that they were perhaps being overheard, sent him away to fetch them wine. A half-hour later the messenger took his leave, and the prisoners followed a very few minutes afterwards. Albemarle turned to the prisoners. "You have heard Mr. Trenchard's story. How do you say, is it true or untrue? You will waste breath in denying it." Trenchard took it again upon himself to admonish them. "For I have with me the landlord of the Hare and Hounds, who will corroborate upon oath what I have said." "We do not deny it," put in Blake, "but we submit that the matter is susceptible to explanation." "You can keep your explanations till your trial then," snapped Albemarle. "I have heard more than enough to commit the pair of you to jail." "But your grace," cried Sir Rowland, so fiercely that one of the tithing men set a restraining hand upon his shoulder, "I am ready to swear that what I did, and what my friend Mr. Westmacott did, was done in the interests of His Majesty. We were working to discover this plot, which, no doubt," put in Trenchard slyly, "is the reason why, having got the letter, your friend Mr. Westmacott locked in a desk, and you kept silence on the matter." "You see," exclaimed Albemarle, "how your lies do but serve further to bind you in the toils. It is ever thus with traitors." "I do think you are a damned traitor, Trenchard," began Blake. "A foul—" But what more he would have said was checked by Albemarle, who thundered forth an order for their removal, and then, scarce were the words uttered than the door at the far end of the hall was opened, and through it came a sound of women's voices. Richard started, for one was the voice of Ruth. An usher advanced. "May it please your grace, there are two ladies here beg that you will hear their evidence in the matter of Mr. Westmacott and Sir Rowland Blake." Albemarle considered a moment. Trenchard stood very thoughtful. "Indeed," said the Duke at last, "I have heard as much as I need hear," and Sir Phelps nodded in token of concurrence. "Not so, however, Colonel Luttrell. Still," said he, "in the interest of His Majesty, perhaps we should be doing well to receive them." Albemarle blew out his cheeks like a man wearied, and stared an instant at Luttrell. Then he shrugged his shoulders. "Admit them, then," he commanded almost peevishly, and Ruth and Diana were ushered into the hall. Both were pale, but whilst Diana was fluttered with excitement, Ruth was calm and cool, and it was she who spoke in answer to the Duke's invitation. The burden of her speech was a clear, succinct recitation, in which she spared neither Wilding nor herself, of how the letter came to have remained in her hands in silence, to have been preserved regarding it. Albemarle heard her very patiently. "If what you say is true, mistress," said he, "and God forbid that I should be so ungallant as to throw doubt upon a lady's word, it certainly explains, although most strangely, how the letter was not brought to us at once by your brother and his friend Sir Rowland. You are prepared to swear that this letter was intended for Mr. Wilding." "I am prepared to swear it," she replied. "This is very serious," said the Duke. "Very serious," assented Sir Edward Phelps. Albemarle, a little flustered, turned to his colleagues. "What do you say to this? Were it perhaps well to order Mr. Wilding's apprehension and to have him brought hither?" "It were to give yourselves useless trouble, gentlemen," said Trenchard, with so much assurance that it was plain Albemarle hesitated. "Beware of Mr. Trenchard, your grace," cried Ruth. "He is Mr. Wilding's friend, and if there is a plot, he is sure to be in it." Albemarle, startled, looked at Trenchard. Had the accusation come from either of the men, the Duke would have silenced him and abused him. But coming from a woman, and so comely a woman, it seemed to his grace worthy at least a consideration. But nimble Mr. Trenchard was easily master of the situation. "Which, of course," he answered, with fine sarcasm, "is the reason why I have been at work for the past 24 hours to lay proofs of this plot before your grace." Albemarle was ashamed of his momentary hesitation. For the rest, said Trenchard, it is perfectly true that I am Mr. Wilding's friend, but the lady is even more intimately connected with him. It happens that she is his wife. His wife, gasped the Duke, whilst Phelps chuckled, and Colonel Luttrell's face grew dark. Trenchard's wicked smile flickered upon his mobile features. There are rumors current of court paid her by Sir Roland. Who knows? He questioned most suggestively, arching his brows and tightening his lips. Wives are strange kittle-cattle, and husbands have been known before to grow inconvenient. Upon reflection, your Grace will no doubt discern a precise degree of faith to attach to what this lady may tell you against Mr. Wilding. Oh! exclaimed Ruth, her cheeks flaming crimson. But this is monstrous. 'Tis how I should myself describe it, answered Trenchard without shame. Spurred to it thus, Ruth poured out the entire story of her marriage, and so clear and lucid was her statement that it threw upon the affair a flood of light. While so frank and truthful was her tone, her narrative hung so well together that the bench began to recover from the shock to its faith, and was again in danger of believing her. Trenchard saw this and trembled. To save Wilding for the cause, he had resorted to this desperate expedient of betraying that cause. It must be observed, however, that he had not done so save under conviction, that betrayed it was bound to be, and that since that was an inevitable thing had better come from him, for Wilding's sake, than from Richard Westmacott. He had taken the bull by the horns in a most desperate fashion when he determined to hoist Richard and Blake with their own petard, hoping that, after all, the harm would reach no further than the destruction of these two, a purely defensive measure. But now this girl threatened to wreck his scheme, just as it was being safely steered to harbor. Suddenly he swung round, interrupting her. Lies, 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 he clamored, and his interruption coming at such a time served to impress the Duke most unfavorably, as well it might. It is our wish to hear this lady out, Mr. Trenchard. The Duke reproved him, but Mr. Trenchard was undismayed. Indeed, he had just discovered a hitherto neglected card, which should put an end to this dangerous game. I do abhor to hear your Grace's patience thus abused, he exclaimed with some show of heat. This lady makes a mock of you. If you allow me to ask 2 questions, or perhaps 3, I'll promise finally to prick this bubble for you. Have I your Grace's leave? Well, well, said Albemarle. Let us hear your questions. And his colleagues nodded. Trenchard turned airily to Ruth. Behind her Diana sat. An attendant had fetched a chair for her. In fear and wonder at what she saw and heard, her eyes ever and anon strained Sir Roland's back, which was toward her. This letter, madam, said he, for the possession of which you have accounted in so picturesque a manner, was intended for and addressed to Mr. Wilding, you say, and you are prepared to swear to it. Ruth turned indignantly to the bench. Must I answer this man's questions? She demanded. I think, perhaps, it were best you did, said the Duke, still showing her all deference. She turned to Trenchard, her head high, her eyes full upon his wrinkled, cynical face. I swear, then, she began, but he, consummate actor that he was in verse and tricks that impress an audience, interrupted her, raising one of his gnarled yellow hands. Nay, nay, said he, I would not have perjury proved against you. I do not ask you to swear. It will be sufficient if you pronounce yourself prepared to swear. She pouted her lip a trifle, her whole expression manifesting her contempt of him. I am in no fear of perjuring myself, she answered fearlessly, and I swear that the letter in question was addressed to Mr. Wilding. As you will, said Trenchard, and was careful not to ask her how she came by her knowledge. The letter, no doubt, was in an outer wrapper, on which there would be a superscription, the name of the person to whom the letter was addressed, he half questioned, and Luttrell, who saw the drift of the question, nodded gravely. No doubt, said Ruth. Now you will acknowledge, I am sure, madam, that such a wrapper would be a document of the greatest importance, as important indeed as the letter itself, since we could depend upon it finally to clear up this point on which we differ. You will admit so much, I think. Why, yes, she answered, but her voice faltered a little, and her glance was not quite so fearless. She, too, saw at last the pit he had dug for her. He leaned forward, smiling quietly, his voice impressively subdued, and launched a bolt that was to annihilate the credibility of the story she had told. Can you, then, explain how it comes that that wrapper has been suppressed? Can you tell us how? The matter being, as you stated, in very self-defense against the dangers of keeping such a letter, your brother did not also keep that wrapper. Her eyes fell away from his face. They turned to Albemarle, who sat scowling again, and from him they flickered unsteadily to Phelps and Luttrell, and lastly to Richard, who, very white and with set teeth, stood listening to the working of his ruin. I do not know, she faltered at last. Ah, said Trenchard, drawing a deep breath. He turned to the bench. Need I suggest what was the need, the urgent need, for suppressing that wrapper? Quoth he. Need I say what name was inscribed upon it? I think not. Your Grace's keen insight, and yours, gentlemen, will determine what was probable. Sir Rowland now stood forward, addressing Albemarle. Will your Grace permit me to offer my explanation of this? Albemarle banged the table. His patience was at an end, since he came now to believe, as Trenchard had earlier suggested, that he had been played upon by Ruth. Too many explanations have I heard already, sir, he answered. He turned to one of his secretaries. In his sudden excess of choler, he forgot his colleagues altogether. The prisoners are committed for trial, said he harshly, and Trenchard breathed freely at last. But the next instant he caught his breath again, for a ringing voice was heard without demanding to see his Grace of Albemarle at once, and the voice was the voice of Anthony Wilding. Chapter 11. The Marplot. Mr. Wilding's appearance produced as many different emotions as there were individuals present. He made the company a sweeping bow on his admission by Albemarle's orders, a bow which was returned by a stare from one and all. Diana eyed him in amazement, Ruth in hope. Richard averted his glance from that of his brother-in-law, while Sir Rowland met it with a scowl of enmity. They had not come face to face since the occasion of that encounter in which Sir Rowland's self-love had been so rudely handled. Albemarle's face expressed a sort of satisfaction, which was reflected on the countenances of Phelps and Luttrell, whilst Trenchard never thought of attempting to dissemble his profound dismay. And this dismay was shared, though not in so deep a measure, by Wilding himself. Trenchard's presence gave him pause, for he had been far, indeed, from dreaming that his friend had a hand in this affair. At sight of him, all was made clear to Mr. Wilding. At once he saw the role which Trenchard had assumed on this occasion, saw to the bottom of the motives that had inspired him to take the bull by the horns and level against Richard and Blake this accusation before they had leisure to level it against himself. His quick wits having fathomed Trenchard's motive, Mr. Wilding was deeply touched by this proof of friendship, and for a second as deeply nonplussed, at loss now how to discharge the task on which he came. You are very choicely come, Mr. Wilding, said Albemarle. You will be able to resolve me certain doubts which have been set on foot by these traitors. That, said Mr. Wilding, is the purpose for which I am here. News reached me of the arrest that had been made. May I beg that your Grace will place me in possession of the facts that have so far transpired. It was one of his secretaries who, at Albemarle's bidding, gave Wilding the information that he craved. He listened gravely. Then, before Albemarle had time to question him on the score of the name that might have been upon the enfolding wrapper of the letter, he begged that he might confer apart a moment with Mr. Trenchard. But Mr. Wilding, said Colonel Luttrell, surprised not to hear the immediate denial of the imputation they had expected, we should first like to hear— By your leave, sirs, Wilding interrupted, I should prefer that you ask me nothing until I consulted with Mr. Trenchard. He saw Luttrell's frown, observed Sir Edward shift his wig to scratch his head in sheer perplexity, and caught the foreshadowing of denial on the Duke's face. So, without giving any of them time to say him nay, he added quickly and very seriously, I am begging this in the interests of justice. Your Grace has told me that some lingering doubt still haunts your mind upon the subject of this letter. The other charges can matter little, apart from that treasonable document. It lies within my power to resolve such doubts most clearly and finally. But I warn you, sirs, that not one word will I utter in this connection until I have had speech with Mr. Trenchard. There was about his mien and voice a firmness that forewarned Albemarle that to insist would be worse than idle. A slight pause followed his words, and Luttrell leaned across to whisper in his Grace's ear. From the Duke's other side, Sir Edward bent his head forward till almost touched those of his companions. Blake watched, and was most foolishly impatient. Your Grace will never allow this, he cried. Said Albemarle, scowling at him. If you allow those two villains to consort together, we are all undone, the baronet protested, and ruin what chance there was of Albemarle's not consenting. It was the one thing needed to determine Albemarle. Like the stubborn man he was, there was naught he detested so much as to have his course dictated to him. More than that, in Sir Roland's anxiety that Wilding and Trenchard should not be allowed to confer apart, he smoked a fear on Sir Roland's part, based upon the baronet's consciousness of his own guilt. He turned from him with a sneering smile, and without so much as consulting his associates, he glanced at Wilding and waved his hand towards the door. "Pray do as you suggest, Mr. Wilding," said he, "but I depend upon you not to tax our patience." "I shall not keep Mr. Trenchard a moment longer than is necessary," said Wilding, giving no hint of the second meaning in his words. He stepped to the door, opened it himself, and signed to Trenchard to pass out. The old player obeyed him readily, if in silence. An usher closed the door after them, and in silence they walked together to the end of the passage. "Where's your horse, Nick?" quoth Wilding abruptly. "What a plague do you mean, where's my horse?" flashed Trenchard. "What midsummer frenzy is this? Damn you for a marplot, Anthony. What a pox are you thinking of to thrust yourself in here at such a time?" "I had no knowledge you were in the affair," said Wilding. "You should have told me." His manner was brisk to the point of dryness. "However, there is still time to get you out of it. Where is your horse?" "Damn my horse," answered Trenchard in a passion. "You have spoiled everything." "On the contrary," said Mr. Wilding tartly, "it seems you had done that very thoroughly before I arrived. Whilst I am touched by the regard for me which has misled you into turning the tables on Blake and Westmacott, yet I do blame you for this betrayal of the cause. There was no help for it. Why? No. And that is why you should have left matters where they stood." Trenchard stamped his foot. Indeed, he almost danced in the excess of his vexation. "Left them where they stood," he echoed. "Body o' me, where are your wits? Left them where they stood. And at any moment you might have been taken unawares as a consequence of this accusation being lodged against you by Richard or by Blake. Then the cause would have been betrayed. Indeed, not more so than it is now." "Not less, at least," snapped the player. "You give me credit for no more wit than yourself. Do you think that I am the man to do things by halves? I have betrayed the plot to Albemarle. But do you imagine I have made no provision for what must follow?" "Provision?" echoed Wilding, staring. "Aye, provision. Godlack, what do you suppose Albemarle will do? Dispatch a messenger to Whitehall with the letter within an hour. You perceive it, do you? And where the plague do you think Nick Trenchard will be what time that messenger rides?" Mr. Wilding understood. "Aye, you may stare," sneered Trenchard. "A letter that has once been stolen may be stolen again. The courier must go by way of Walford. I had in my mind arranged a spot close by the ford where I should fall upon him, rob him of his dispatches, and take him bound hand and foot if necessary to Valency's, who lives close by, and there I'd leave him until word came that the Duke had landed." "That the Duke had landed?" cried Wilding. "You talk as though the thing were imminent. And imminent it is. For aught we know, he may be in England already." Mr. Wilding laughed impatiently. "You must forever be building on these crack-brained rumors, Nick," said he. "Rumors?" roared the other. "Rumors? Ha!" He checked his wild scorn and proceeded in a different key. "I was forgetting. You do not know the contents of that stolen letter." Wilding started. Underlying his disbelief in the talk of the countryside, and even in the military measures which by the king's orders were being taken in the West, was an uneasy dread lest they should prove to be well-founded, lest Argyle's operations in Scotland should be but the forerunner of a rash and premature invasion by Monmouth. He knew the Duke was surrounded by such reckless, foolhardy counselors as Grey and Ferguson, and yet he could not think the Duke would ruin all by coming before he had definite word that his friends were ready. He looked at Trenchard now with anxious eyes. "Have you seen the letter, Nick?" he asked, and almost dreaded the reply. "Albemarle showed it me an hour ago," said Trenchard. "And it contains?" "The news we fear. It is in the Duke's own hand, and intimates that he will follow it in a few days. In a few days, man and person." Mr. Wilding clenched teeth and hands. "God help us all, then," he muttered grimly. "Meanwhile," quoth Trenchard, bringing him back to the point, There is this precious business here. I had as choice a plan as could have been devised, and it must have succeeded, had you not come blundering into it to mar it all at the last moment. That fat fool Albemarle had swallowed my impeachment like a draught of muscadine. Do you hear me? He ended sharply, for Mr. Wilding stood bemused, his thoughts plainly wandering. He let his hand fall upon Trenchard's shoulder. No, said he. I wasn't listening. No matter. For even had I known the full extent of your scheme, I still must have interfered. For the sake of Mistress Westmacott's blue eyes, no doubt, sneered Trenchard. Pah! Wherever there's a woman, there's the loss of a man. For the sake of Mistress Wilding's blue eyes, his friend corrected him. I'll allow no brother of hers to hang in my place. It will be interesting to see how you will rescue him. By telling the truth to Albemarle. He'll not believe it. I shall prove it, said Wilding quietly. Trenchard swung round upon him in mingled anger and alarm for him. You shall not do it, he snarled. It is nothing short of treason to the Duke to get yourself laid by the heels at such a time as this. I hope to avoid it, answered Wilding confidently. Avoid it? How? Not by staying longer here and talk. That will ruin all. Away with you, Trenchard. By my soul, no, answered Trenchard. I'll not leave you. If I have got you into this, I'll help to get you out again or stay in it with you. Bethink you of Monmouth? Wilding admonished him. Damn Monmouth, was a vicious answer. I am here, and here I stay. Get to horse, you fool, and ride to Walford as you proposed, there to ambush the messenger. The letter will go to Whitehall none the less in spite of what I shall tell Albemarle. If things go well with me, I shall join you at Valencies before long. Why? If that is your intention, said Trenchard, I had better stay, and we can ride together. It will make it less uncertain for you. But less certain for you. The more reason why I should remain. The door of the hall was suddenly flung open at the far end of the corridor, and Albemarle's booming voice, impatiently raised, reached them where they stood. In any case, added Trenchard, it seems there is no help for it now. Mr. Wilding shrugged his shoulders, but otherwise dissembled his vexation. Up the passage floated the constable's voice calling them. Side by side they moved down, and side by side they stepped once more into the presence of Christopher Monk and his associates. Sirs, you have not been in haste, was the Duke's ill-humored greeting. We have tarried a little that we might make an end the sooner, answered Trenchard dryly, and this was the first indication he gave Mr. Wilding of how naturally like the inimitable actor he was. He had slipped into his new role. Albemarle waved the frivolous rejoinder aside. Come, Mr. Wilding, said he, let us hear what you may have to say. You are not, I take it, about to urge any reasons why these rogues should not be committed. Indeed, your grace, said Wilding, that is what I am about to urge. Blake and Richard looked at him suddenly, and from him to Trenchard, but it was only Ruth whose eyes were shrewd enough to observe the altered demeanor of the latter. Her hopes rose, founded upon this oddly assorted pair. Already in anticipation, she was stirred by gratitude towards Wilding, and was an impatient and almost wondering awe that she waited for him to proceed. I take it, sir, he said, without waiting for Albemarle to express any of the fresh astonishment his countenance manifested, that the accusation against these gentlemen rests entirely upon the letter which you've been led to believe was addressed to Mr. Westmacott. The Duke scowled a moment before replying. Why, said he, if it could be shown, irrefutably shown, that the letter was not addressed to either of them, that would no doubt establish the truth of what they say, that they possessed themselves of the letter in the interests of His Majesty. He turned to Luttrell and Phelps, and they nodded their concurrence with his view of the matter. But, he continued, if you are proposing to prove any such thing, I think you will find it difficult. Mr. Wilding drew a crumpled paper from his pocket. When the courier whom they robbed, as they have correctly informed you, said he quietly, suspected their design upon the contents of his wallet, he bethought him of removing the wrapper from the letter, so that in case the letter were seized by them it should prove nothing against any man in particular. He stuffed the wrapper into the lining of his hat, preserving it as a proof of his good faith against the time when he should bring the letter to its destination, or come to confess that it had been taken from him. That wrapper the courier brought to me, and I have it here. The evidence it will give should be more than sufficient to warrant your restoring these unjustly accused gentlemen their liberty. "The courier took it to you?" echoed Albemarle, stupefaction in his glance. "But why do you—" "Because," said Wilding, and with his left hand he placed a wrapper before Albemarle, whilst his right dropped again to his pocket. The letter, as you may see, was addressed to me. The quiet manner in which he made the announcement conveyed almost as great a shock as the announcement itself. Albemarle took up the wrapper. Luttrell and Phelps craned forward to join him in his scrutiny of it. They compared the two, paper with paper, writing with writing. Then Monk flung one and the other down in front of him. "What lies have I been hearing, then?" he demanded furiously of Trenchard. "Slife, I'll make an example of you. Arrest me that rogue. Arrest them both." And he half rose from his seat, his trembling hand pointing to Wilding and Trenchard. Two of the tithing men stirred to do his bidding, but in the same instant Albemarle found himself looking into the round nozzle of the pistol. "If," said Mr. Wilding, "a finger is laid upon Mr. Trenchard or me, I shall have the extreme mortification of being compelled to shoot your grace." His pleasantly modulated voice was as deliberate and calm as if he were offering the bench a pinch of snuff. Albemarle's dark visage crimsoned. His eyes became at once wicked and afraid. Sir Edward's cheeks turned pale. His glance grew startled. Luttrell alone, vigilant and dangerous, preserved his calm, but the situation baffled even him. Behind the two friends of tithing men had come to a terror-stricken halt. Diana had risen from her chair in the excitement of the moment and had drawn close to Ruth, who looked on with parted lips and bosom that rose and fell. Even Blake could not stifle his admiration of Mr. Wilding's coolness and address. Richard, on the other hand, was concerned only with thoughts for himself, wondering how it would fare with him if Wilding and Trenchard succeeded in getting away. "Nick," said Mr. Wilding, "will you desire those catchpoles behind us to stand aside? If your grace raises your voice to call for help, if, indeed, any measures are taken calculated to lead to our capture, I can promise your grace, notwithstanding my profound reluctance to use violence, that they will be the last measures you will take in life. Be good enough to open the door, Nick, and to see that the key is on the outside." Trenchard, who was by way of enjoying himself now, stepped briskly down the hall to do as his friend bade him, with a wary eye on the tithing men, but never so much as a finger did they dare to lift. Mr. Wilding's calm was too deadly. They had seen a man in earnest before this, and they knew his appearance now. From the doorway, Trenchard called Mr. Wilding. "I must be going, your grace," said the latter very courteously, "but I shall not be so wanting in deference to His Majesty's august representatives as to turn my back upon you." Saying which, he walked backwards, holding his pistol level, until he had reached Trenchard and the door. There he paused and made them a deep bow, his manner the more mocking in that there was no tinge of mockery perceptible. "Your very obedient servant," said he, and stepped outside. Trenchard turned the key, withdrew it from the lock, and, standing on tiptoe, thrust it upon the ledge of the lintel. Instantly a clamor arose within the chamber, but the two friends never stayed to listen. Down the passage they sped at the double and out into the courtyard. Here Ruth's groom, mounted himself, was walking his mistress's and Diana's horses up and down whilst he waited. Yonder one of Sir Edward's stable boys was holding Mr. Wilding's roan. 2 or 3 men of the Somerset militia, in their red and yellow liveries, lounged by the gates and turned uninterested eyes upon these newcomers. Wilding approached his wife's groom. "Get down," he said. "I need your horse, on the king's business. Get down, I say," he added impatiently, upon noting the fellow's stare, and, seizing his leg, he helped him to dismount by almost dragging him from the saddle. "Up with you, Nick," said he, and Nick very promptly mounted. "Your mistress will be here presently," Wilding told the groom, and, turning on his heel, strode to his own mare. A moment later Trenchard, and he vanished through the gateway with a tremendous clatter, just as the Lord Lieutenant, Colonel Luttrell, Sir Edward Phelps, the constable, the tithing men, Sir Roland, Richard, and the ladies made their appearance. Ruth pushed her way quickly to the front. She feared lest her horse and her cousin's being at hand might be used for pursuit. So, urging Diana to do the same, she snatched her reins from the hands of the dumbfounded groom and leapt nimbly to the saddle. "After them," roared Albemarle, and the constable with 2 of his men made a dash for the gateway to raise a hue and cry, whilst the militiamen watched them in stupid, inactive wonder. "Damnation, mistress!" thundered the Duke in ever-increasing passion. Hold your nag, woman. For Ruth's horse had become unmanageable, and was caracoling about the yard between the men and the gateway in such a manner that they dared not attempt to win past her. You have scared him with your bellowing, she panted, tugging at the bridle, and all but backed into the constable who had been endeavoring to get round behind her. The beast continued its wild prancing, and the Duke abetted nothing in his furious profanity, until suddenly the groom, having relinquished to Diana the reins of the other horse, sprang to Ruth's assistance and caught her bridle in a firm grasp which brought the animal to a standstill. "You fool!" she hissed at him, and half raised her whip to strike, but checked on the impulse, bethinking her in time that, after all, what the poor lad had done he had done thinking her distressed. The constable and a couple of his fellows won through. Others were rousing the stable and getting the horse, and in the courtyard all was bustle and commotion. Meanwhile, however, Mr. Wilding and Trenchard had made the most of their start, and were thundering through the town. Chapter 12. At the ford, as Mr. Wilding and Nick Trenchard rode hell to leather through Taunton streets, they never noticed a horseman at the door of the Red Lion Inn. But the horseman noticed them. He looked up at the sound of their wild approach, started upon recognizing them, and turned in his saddle as they swept past him to call upon them excitedly to stop. "Hi!" he shouted. "Nick Trenchard." "Hi, Wilding." Then, seeing that they either did not hear or did not heed him, he loosed a volley of oaths, wheeled his horse about, drove home the spurs, and started in pursuit. Out of the town he followed them and along the road towards Walford, shouting and clamoring at first, afterward in a grim and angry silence. Now, despite their natural anxiety for their own safety, Wilding and Trenchard had by no means abandoned their project of taking cover by the ford to await the messenger whom Albemarle and the others would no doubt be sending to Whitehall, and this mad fellow thundering after them seemed a fair way to mar their plan. As they reluctantly passed the spot they had marked out for their ambush, splashed through the ford and breasted the rising ground beyond, they took counsel. They determined to stand and meet this rash pursuer. Trenchard calmly opined that if necessary they must shoot him. He was, I fear, a bloody-minded fellow at bottom, although, it is true, he justified himself now by pointing out that this was no time to hesitate at trifles. Partly because they talked and partly because the gradient was steep and their horses needed breathing, they slackened rein, and the horseman behind them came tearing to the water of the ford, and lessened the distance considerably in the next few minutes. He bethought him of using his lungs once more. "Hi, Wilding. Hold, damn you. He curses you in a most intimate manner," quoth Trenchard. Wilding reined in and turned in the saddle. "His voice has a familiar sound," said he. He shaded his eyes with his hand, and looked down the slope at the pursuer, who came on crouching low upon the withers of his goaded beast. "Wait!" the fellow shouted. "I have news for you." "It's Valancy!" cried Wilding suddenly. Trenchard, too, had drawn rein and was looking behind him. Instead of expressing relief at the discovery that this was not an enemy, he swore at the trouble to which they had so needlessly put themselves, and he was still at his vituperations when Valancy came up with them, red in the face and very angry, cursing them roundly for the folly of their mad career, and for not having stopped when he bade them. "It was no doubt discourteous," said Mr. Wilding, "but we took you for some friend of the Lord Lieutenant's." "Are they after you?" quoth Valancy, his face of a sudden very startled. "Like enough," said Trenchard, "if they have found their horses yet." "Forward, then." Valancy urged him in excitement, and he picked up his reins again. "You shall hear my news as we ride." "Not so," said Trenchard. "We have business here, down yonder at the ford." "Business? What business?" They told him, and scarce had they got the words out than he cut in impatiently. "That's no matter now." "Not yet, perhaps," said Mr. Wilding, "but will be if that letter gets to Whitehall." "Odd so," was the impatient retort. "There's other news traveling to Whitehall that will make small beer of this, and belike it's well on its way there already." "What news is that?" asked Trenchard. Valancy told them. "The Duke has landed. He came ashore this morning at Lyme." "The Duke?" quoth Mr. Wilding, whilst Trenchard merely stared. "What Duke? What Duke? Lord, you weary me. What Dukes be there?" "The Duke of Monmouth, man." "Monmouth?" They uttered the name in a breath. "But is this really true?" asked Wilding. Or is it but another rumor? Remember the letter your friends intercepted? Trenchard bade him. I am not forgetting it, said Wilding. It's no rumor, Valancy assured them. I was at White Lackington 3 hours ago when the news came to George Peak, and I was riding to carry it to you, going by way of Taunton that I might drop word of it for our friends at the Red Lion. Trenchard needed no further convincing. He looked accordingly dismayed. But Wilding found it still almost impossible, in spite of what already he had learnt, to credit this amazing news. It was hard to believe the Duke of Monmouth mad enough to spoil all by this sudden and unheralded precipitation. You heard the news at White Lackington, said he slowly. Who carried it thither? There were 2 messengers, answered Valancy with restrained impatience, and they were Heywood Dare, who has been appointed paymaster to the Duke's forces, and Mr. Chamberlain. Mr. Wilding was observed for once to change color. He gripped Valancy by the wrist. You saw them? He demanded, and his voice had a husky, unusual sound. You saw them? With these 2 eyes, answered Valancy, and I spoke with them. It was true, then. There was no room for further doubt. Wilding looked at Trenchard, who shrugged his shoulders and made a wry face. I never thought but that we were working in the service of a harebrain, said he contemptuously. Valancy proceeded to details. Dare and Chamberlain, he informed them, came off the Duke's own frigate at daybreak today. They were put ashore at Seaton, and they rode straight to Mr. Speaks with the news, returning afterwards to Lyme. What men has the Duke with him, did you learn? Asked Wilding. Not more than 100 or so, from what Dare told us. 100? God help us all. And is England to be conquered with 100 men? Oh, this is midsummer frenzy. He counts on all true Protestants to flock to his banner, put in Trenchard, and it was not plain whether he expressed a fact or sneer at one. Does he bring money and arms, at least? Asked Wilding. I did not ask, answered Valancy. But Dare told us that 3 vessels had come over, so that it is to be supposed he brings some manner of provision with him. It is to be hoped so, Valancy, but hardly to be supposed, quoth Trenchard, and then he touched Wilding on the arm and pointed with his whip across the fields towards Taunton. A cloud of dust was rising from between tall hedges where ran the road. I think it were wise to be moving. At least, this sudden landing of James Scott relieves my mind in the matter of that letter. Wilding, having taken a look at the floating dust that announced the oncoming of the pursuers, was now lost in thought. Valancy, who, beyond excitement at the news of which he was a bearer, seemed to have no opinion of his own as to the wisdom or folly of the Duke's sudden arrival, looked from one to the other of these 2 men whom he had known as the prime secret agents in the West, and waited. Trenchard moved his horse a few paces nearer the hedge. Whither now, Anthony? He asked suddenly. You may ask indeed, exclaimed Wilding, and his voice was as bitter as ever Trenchard had heard it. As heart, we are in it now. We had best make for Lyme, if only that we may attempt to persuade this crack-brained boy to ship back to Holland again and ship ourselves with him. There's sense in you at last, grumbled Trenchard, but I misdoubt me he'll turn back after having come so far. Have you any money? He asked. He could be very practical at times. A guinea or 2, but I can get money at Ilminster. And how do you propose to reach Ilminster with these gentlemen by way of cutting us off? We'll double back as far as the crossroads, said Wilding promptly, and strike south over Swell Hill for Hatch. If we ride hard, we can do it easily, and have little fear of being followed. They'll naturally take it we have made for Bridgewater. They acted on a suggestion there, and then, Valancy going with them, for his task was now accomplished, and he was all eager to get to Lyme to kiss the hand of the Protestant Duke. They rode hard, as Wilding had said they must, and they reached the junction of the roads before their pursuers hove in sight. Here Wilding suddenly detained them again. The road ahead of them ran straight for almost a mile, so that if they took it now, they were almost sure to be seen presently by the messengers. On their right, a thickly grown coppice stretched from the road to the stream that babbled in the hollow. He gave it as his advice that they should lie hidden there until those who hunted them should have gone by. Obviously, that was the only plan, and his companions instantly adopted it. They found a way through a gate into an adjacent field, and from this they gained the shelter of the trees. Trenchard, neglectful of his finery and oblivious of the ubiquitous brambles, left his horse in Valency's care, and crept to the edge of the thicket that he might take a peep at the pursuers. They came up very soon, 6 militiamen in lobster coats with yellow facings, and a sergeant, which was what Mr. Trenchard might have expected. There was, however, something else that Mr. Trenchard did not expect, something that afforded him considerable surprise. At the head of the party rode Sir Rowland Blake, obviously leading it, and with him was Richard Westmacott. Amongst them went a man in gray clothes, whom Mr. Trenchard rightly conjectured to be the messenger riding for Whitehall. He thought with a smile of what a handful he and Wilding would have had they waited to rob that messenger of the incriminating letter that he bore. Then he checked his smile to consider again how Sir Rowland Blake came to head that party. He abandoned the problem, as the little troop swept unhesitatingly round to the left and went pounding along the road that led northwards to Bridgewater, clearly never doubting which way their quarry had sped. As for Sir Rowland Blake's connection with this pursuit, the town gallant had by his earnestness not only convinced Colonel Luttrell of his loyalty and devotion to King James, but had actually gone so far as to beg that he might be allowed to prove that same loyalty by leading the soldiers to the capture of those self-confessed traitors, Mr. Wilding and Mr. Trenchard. From his knowledge of their haunts, he was confident. He assured Colonel Luttrell that he could be of service to the king in this matter. The fierce sincerity of his purpose shone through his words. Luttrell caught the accent of hate in Sir Rowland's tense voice, and being a shrewd man, he saw that if Mr. Wilding was to be taken, an enemy would surely be the best pursuer to accomplish it. So he prevailed and gave him the trust he sought, in spite of Albemarle's express reluctance. And never did bloodhound set out more relentlessly purposeful upon a scent than did Sir Rowland follow now in what he believed to be the track of this man who stood between him and Ruth Westmacott. Until Ruth was widowed, Sir Rowland's hopes of her must lie fallow, and so it was with zest that he flung himself into the task of widowing her. As the party passed out of view round the angle of the White Road, Trenchard made his way back to Wilding to tell him what he had seen and to lay before him, for his enucleation, the problem of Blake's being the leader of it. But Wilding thought little of Blake, and cared little of what he might be the leader. "We'll stay here," said he, until they had passed the crest of the hill. This, Trenchard told him, was his own purpose, for to leave their concealment earlier would be to reveal themselves to any of the troopers who might happen to glance over his shoulder. And so they waited some 10 minutes or so, and then walked their horses slowly and carefully forward through the trees toward the road. Wilding was alongside and slightly ahead of Trenchard. Valency followed close upon their tails. Suddenly, as Wilding was about to put his mare at the low stone wall, Trenchard leaned forward and caught his bridle. "SS," he hissed. "Horses." And now that they halted, they heard the hoofbeats clear and close at hand. The crackling of undergrowth and the rustle of the leaves through which they had thrust their passage had deafened their ears to other sounds until this moment. They checked and waited where they stood, barely screened by the few boughs that still might intervene between them and the open, not daring to advance, and not daring to retreat lest their movements should draw attention to themselves. They remained absolutely still, scarcely breathing, their only hope being that if these who came should chance to be enemies, they might ride on without looking to right or left. It was so slender a hope that Wilding looked to the priming of his pistols, whilst Trenchard, who had none, loosened his sword in its scabbard. Nearer came the riders. "There are not more than 3, whispered Trenchard, who had been listening intently, and Mr. Wilding nodded, but said nothing. Another moment, and the little party was abreast of those watchers. A dark brown riding habit flashed into their line of vision, and a blue one laced with gold. At sight of the first, Mr. Wilding's eyelids flickered. He had recognized it for Ruth's, with whom rode Diana, while some 20 paces or so behind came Jerry, the groom. They were returning to Bridgewater. They came along, looking neither to right nor to left, as the 3 men had hoped they would, and they were all but past, when suddenly Wilding gave his roan a touch of the spur and bounded forward. Diana's horse swerved so that it nearly threw her. Ruth, slightly ahead, reined in at once. So, too, did the groom in the rear, and so violently in his sudden fear of highwaymen that he brought his horse onto its hind legs and had it prancing and rearing madly about the road, so that he was hard put to it to keep his seat. Ruth looked round as Mr. Wilding's voice greeted her. "Mistress Wilding," he called to her. "A moment, if I may detain you." "You have eluded them," she cried, entirely off her guard in her surprise at seeing him, and there echoed through her words a note of genuine gladness that almost disconcerted her husband for a moment. The next instant a crimson flush overspread her pale face, and her eyes were veiled from him, vexation in her heart at having betrayed the lively satisfaction it afforded her to see him safe when she feared him captured already, or at least upon the point of capture. She had admired him almost unconsciously for his daring at the town hall that day, when his strong calm had stood out in such sharp contrast to the fluster and excitement of the men about him. Of them all, indeed, it had seemed to her in those stressful moments that he was the only man, and she was, although she did not realize it, in danger of being proud of him. Then again the thing he had done. He had come deliberately to thrust his head into the lion's maw, that he might save her brother. It was possible that he had done it in answer to the entreaties which he had earlier feared she had poured into deaf ears, or it was possible that he had done it spurred by a sense of right and justice, which would not permit him to allow another to suffer in his stead. However much that other might be caught in the very toils that he had prepared for Mr. Wilding himself. Her admiration, then, was swelled by gratitude, and it was a compound of these that had urged her to hinder the tithing men from winning past her until he and Trenchard should have got well away. Afterwards, when with Diana and her groom, on a horse which Sir Edward Phelps insisted upon lending them, she rode homeward from Taunton, there was Diana to keep alive the spark of kindness that glowed at last for Wilding in Ruth's breast. Miss Horton extolled his bravery, his chivalry, his nobility, and ended by expressing her envy of Ruth that she should have won such a man amongst men for her husband, and wondered what it might be that kept Ruth from claiming him for her own as was her right. Ruth had answered little, but she had ridden very thoughtful. There was that in the past she found it hard to forgive Wilding, and yet she would now have welcomed an opportunity of thanking him for what he had done, of expressing to him something of the respect he had won in her eyes by his act of self-denunciation to save her brother. This chance, it seemed, was given her, for there he stood, with head bare before her, and already she thought no longer of seizing the chance, vexed as she was at having been surprised into a betrayal of feelings whose warmth she had until that moment scarce estimated. In answer to her cry of "You have eluded them," he waved a hand towards the rising ground and the road to Bridgewater. "They passed that way but a few moments since," said he, "and by the rate at which they were traveling they should be nearing Newton by now. In their great haste to catch me, they could not pause to look for me so close at hand," he added with a smile, "and for that I am thankful." She sat her horse and answered nothing, which threw her cousin out of all patience with her. "Come, Jerry," Diana called the groom. "We will walk our horses up the hill." "You are very good, madam," said Mr. Wilding, and he bowed to the withers of his roan. Ruth said nothing, expressed neither approval nor disapproval of Diana's withdrawal, and the latter, with a word of greeting to Wilding, went ahead followed by Jerry, who had regained control by now the beast he best rode. Wilding watched them until they turned the corner. Then he walked his mare slowly forward until he was alongside Ruth. "Before I go," said he, "there is something I should like to say." His dark eyes were somber. His manner betrayed some hesitation. The diffidence of his tone proved startling to her by virtue of its unusualness. What might it portend? She wondered, and sought with grave eyes to read his baffling countenance. And then a wild alarm swept into her and shook her spirit in its grip. There was something of which until this moment she had not thought, something connected with the fateful matter of that letter. It had stood as a barrier between them, her buckler, her sole defense against him. It had been to her what its sting is to the bee, a thing which if once used in self-defense is self-destructive. Not, indeed, that she had used it as her sting. It had been forced from her by the machinations of Trenchard, but used it had been, and was done with. She had it no longer that with it she might hold him in defiance, and it did not occur to her that he was no longer in case to invoke the law. Her face grew stony. A dry glitter came to her blue eyes. She cast a glance over her shoulder at Diana and her servant. Wilding observed it and read what was passing in her mind. Indeed, it was not to be mistaken, no more than what is passed in the mind of the recruit who looks behind him in the act of charging. His lips half smiled. "Of what are you afraid?" he asked her. "I am not afraid," she answered in husky accents that belied her. Perhaps to reassure her, perhaps because he thought of his companions lurking in the thicket and cared not to have them for his audience, he suggested they should go a little way in the direction her cousin had taken. She wheeled her horse, and side by side they ambled up the dusty road. "The thing I have to tell you," said he presently, "concerns myself. Does it concern me? She asked him coldly, and her coolness was urged partly by her newborn fears, partly to counterbalance such impression as her ill-judged show of gladness at his safety might have made upon his mind. He flashed her a sidelong glance, the long white fingers of his right hand toying thoughtfully with a ringlet of the dark brown hair that fell upon the shoulders of his scarlet coat. "Surely, madam," he answered dryly, "what concerns a man may well concern his wife." She bowed her head, her eyes upon the road before her. "True," said she, her voice expressionless. "I had forgot." He reined in and turned to look at her. Her horse moved on a pace or two, then came to a halt, apparently of its own accord. "I do protest," said he. "You treat me less kindly than I deserve." He urged his mare forward until he had come up with her again, and then drew rein once more. "I think that I may lay some claim to, at least, your gratitude for what I did today." "It is my inclination to be grateful," said she. She was very wary of him. "Forgive me if I am still mistrustful." "But of what?" he cried, a thought impatiently. "Of you. What ends did you seek to serve? Was it to save Richard that you came?" "Unless you think that it was to save Blake," he said ironically, "what other ends you conceive I could have served?" She made him no answer, and so he resumed after a pause. "I rode to Taunton to serve you for two reasons. Because you asked me, and because I would have no innocent men suffer in my stead. Not even though, as these men, they were but caught in their own toils, hoist with the petard they had charged for me. Beyond these two motives, I had no other thought in ruining myself." "Ruining yourself?" she cried. Yes, it was true, but she had not thought of it until this moment. There had been so much to think of. Is it not ruin to be outlawed? To have a price set upon your head, as will no doubt a price be set on mine when Albemarle's messenger shall have reached Whitehall? Is it not ruin to have my lands and all I own made forfeit to state, to find myself a beggar, hunted and prescribed? Forgive me that I harass you with this catalogue of my misfortunes. You'll say, no doubt, that I have brought them upon myself by compelling you against your will to marry me. I'll not deny that it is in my mind, said she, in of set purpose stifled pity. He sighed and looked at her again, but she would not meet his eye, else its whimsical expression might have intrigued her. "Can you deny my magnanimity, I wonder?" said he, and spoke almost as one amused. "All I sacrificed to do your will, to save your brother from the snare of his own contriving against me. I wonder do you yet realize how much I sacrificed today at Taunton? I wonder," and he paused, looking at her and waiting for some word from her. But she had none for him. "Clearly you do not, else I think you would show me if only a pretense of kindness." She was looking at him at last, her eyes less hard. They seemed to ask him to explain. "When you came this morning with the tale of how the tables had been turned upon your brother, of how he was caught in his own springe, and the letter found in his keeping was before the king's folk at Taunton with every appearance of having been addressed to him, and not a tittle of evidence to show that it had been meant for me, do you know what news it was you brought me?" He paused a second, looking at her from narrowing eyes. Then he answered his own question. "You brought me the news that you were mine to take whensoever I pleased. Whilst that letter was in your hands, it gave you the power to make me your obedient slave. You might blow upon me as you listed whilst you held it, and I was a vein that must turn to your blowing for my honor's sake and for the sake of the cause in which I worked. Through no rashness of mine must that letter come into the hands of the king's friends, else was I dishonored. It was an effective barrier between us. So long as you possessed that letter you might pipe as you pleased, and I must dance to the tune you set. And then this morning what you came to tell me was that things were changed, that it was mine to call the tune. Had I had the strength to be a villain, you had been mine now, and your brother and Sir Roland might have hanged on the rope of their own weaving." She looked at him in a startled, almost shamefaced manner. This was an aspect of the case she had not considered. "You realize it, I see," he said, and smiled wistfully. "Then perhaps you realize why you found me so unwilling to do the thing you craved. Having treated me ungenerously, you came to cast yourself upon my generosity, asking me, though I scarcely think you understood, to beg of myself of life itself with all it held for me. God knows I make no pretense to virtue, and yet I think I had been something more than human had I not refused you in the bargain you offered, a bargain that you would never be called upon to fulfill if I did the thing you asked. At last she interrupted him. She could bear it no longer. I had not thought of it, she cried. It was a piteous wail that broke from her. I swear I had not thought of that. I was all distraught for poor Richard's sake. Oh, Mr. Wilding. She turned to him, holding out a hand. Her eyes shone, filmed with moisture. I shall have a kindness for you, all my days for your generosity today. It was lamentably weak, far from the hot expressions which she forced it to replace. Yes, I was generous, he admitted. We will move on as far as the crossroads. Again they ambled gently forward. Up the slope from the Fort Diana and Jerry were slowly climbing. Not another human being was in sight ahead or behind them. After you left me, he continued, your memory and your entreaties linger with me. I gave the matter of our position thought, and it seemed to me that all was monstrously ill done. I loved you, Ruth. I needed you, and you disdained me. My love was master of me, but 'neath your disdain it was transmuted oddly. He checked the passion that was vibrating in his voice and resumed after a pause in the calm, slow tones, soft and musical, that were his own. There is scarce the need for so much recapitulation. When the power was mine, I bent you unfairly to my will. You did as much by me when the power suddenly became yours. It was a strange war between us, and I accepted its conditions. Today, when the power was mine again, mine to bring you at last to subjection, behold, I have capitulated at your bidding, and all that I held, including your own self, have I relinquished. It is perhaps fitting. Haply I am punished for having with you before I had wooed you. Again his tone changed. It grew more cold, more matter-of-fact. I rode this way a little while ago, a hunted man. My only hope to reach home and collect what moneys and valuables I could carry, and make for the coast to find a vessel bound for Holland. I have been engaged, as you know, in stirring up rebellion to check the iniquities and persecutions that are toward in the land I love. I'll not weary you with details. Time was needed for this, as for all things, and by next spring, perhaps, had matters gone well, this vineyard that so carefully and secretly I have been tending would have been, maybe, in condition to bear fruit. Even now, in the hour of my flight, I learned that others have come to force this delicate growth into sudden maturity. There, soon ripe, soon rotten. The Duke of Monmouth has landed at Lyme this morning. I am riding to him. To what end? She cried, and he saw at her face a dismay that amounted almost to fear, and he wondered was it for him. To place my sword at his service. Were I not encompassed by this ruin, I should not have stirred a foot in that direction. So rash, so foredoomed to failure is this invasion. As it is, he shrugged and laughed. It is the only hope, all forlorn though it may be for me. The trammel she had imposed upon her soul fell away at that like bonds of cobweb. She laid her hand upon his wrists. Tears stood in her eyes. Her lips quivered. Anthony, forgive me, she besought him. He trembled under her touch, under the caress of her voice, and at the sound of his name for the first time upon her lips. What have I to forgive? He asked. The thing that I did in the matter of that letter. You poor child, said he, smiling gently upon her. You did it in self-defense. Yet say that you forgive me. Say it before you go, she begged him. He considered her gravely a moment. To what end? He asked. Do you imagine that I have talked so much? To the end that I might show you that however I may have wronged you, I have at the last made some amends, and that for the sake of this, the truest proof of penitence, I may have your forgiveness ere I go. She was weeping softly. It was an ill day on which we met, she sighed. For you, nay, for you, we'll say for both of us, then, he compromised. See, Ruth, your cousin grows weary, and I have a couple comrades who are no doubt impatient to be gone. It may not be good for us to tarry in these parts. Some amends I've made, but there is one crowning wrong which I have done you, for which there is but one amend to make. He paused. He steadied himself before continuing. In his attempt to render his voice cold and commonplace, he went near to achieving harshness. It may be that this crack-brained rebellion of which the torch is already alight will, if it does no other good in England, at least make a widow of you. When that has come to pass, when I have thus repaired the wrong I did you, I hope you'll bear me as kindly as may be in your thought. Goodbye, my Ruth. I would you might have loved me. I sought to force it. He smiled ever so wanly. Perhaps that was my mistake. It is an ill thing to eat one's hay while it is grass. He raised to his lips the little gloved hand that still rested on his wrist. God keep you, Ruth, he murmured. She sought to answer him, but something choked her. A sob was all she achieved. Had he courted him in that moment, there is little doubt but that she had yielded. Perhaps he knew it, and knowing it kept a tighter rein upon desire. She was as metal molten in the crucible, to be molded by his craftsman's hands into any pattern that he chose. But the crucible was a crucible of pity, not of love. That, too, he knew, and knowing it, forbore. He dropped her hand, doffed his hat, and, wheeling his horse about, touched it with a spur and rode back toward the thicket where his friends awaited him. As he left her, she too wheeled about, as if to follow him. She strove to command her voice that she might recall him, but at that same moment Trenchard, hearing his returning hoofs, thrust out into the road with Valancy following at his heels. The old player's harsh voice reached her where she stood, and it was querulous with impatience. "What plague do you mean? Dallying here at such a time, Anthony," he cried, to which Valancy added, "In God's name, let us push on." At that she checked her impulse. It may even be that she mistrusted it. She paused, lingering undecided for an instant. Then, turning her horse once more, she ambled up the slope to rejoin Diana. Chapter 13. Pro Religione et Libertate. The evening was far advanced when Mr. Wilding and his two companions descended to Uplime Common from the heights, whence as they rode, they had commanded a clear view of the fair valley of the Axe, lying now under a thin opalescent veil of evening mist. They had paused at Ilminster for fresh horses, and there Wilding had paid a visit to one of his agents from whom he procured 100 guineas. Thence they had come south at a sharp pace, and with little said. Wilding was moody and thoughtful, filled with chagrin at this unconscionable rashness of the man upon whom all his hopes were centered. As they cantered briskly across Uplime Common in the twilight, they passed several bodies of countrymen, all heading for the town, and one group sent up a shout of "God save the Protestant Duke" as they rode past him. "Amen to that," muttered Mr. Wilding grimly, "for I am afraid that no man can." In the narrow lane by Hay Farm a horseman, going the opposite direction, passed him at the gallop, but they had met several such since leaving Ilminster, for indeed the news was spreading fast, and the whole countryside was alive with messengers, some on foot and some on horseback, but all hurrying as if their lives depended on their haste. They made their way to the marketplace where Monmouth's declaration, that remarkable manifesto from the pen of Ferguson, had been read some hours before. Thence, having ascertained where his grace was lodged, they made their way to the George Inn. In Coombe Street, they found the crowd so dense that they could but with difficulty open out a way for their horses through the human press. Not a window but was open and thronged with sightseers, mostly women, indeed, for the men were in the press below. On every hand resounded the cries of a Monmouth, the Protestant religion and liberty, which latter were the words inscribed on the standard Monmouth had set up that evening on the church cliffs. In truth, Wilding was amazed at what he saw, and said as much to Trenchard. So pessimistic had been his outlook that he had almost expected to find the rebellion snuffed out by the time they reached Lyme of the King. What had the authorities been about that they had permitted Monmouth to come ashore, or had Valancy's information been wrong in the matter of the numbers that accompanied the Protestant champion? Wilding's red coat attracted some attention. In the dusk, its color was almost all that could be discerned of it. "Here's a militia captain for the Duke," cried one, and others took up the cry, and if it did nothing else it opened a way for them through that solid human mass, and permitted them to win through to the yard of the George Inn. They found the spacious quadrangle thronged with men, armed and unarmed, and on the steps stood a tall, well-knit, soldierly man, his hat rakishly cocked, about whom a crowd of townsmen and country fellows were pressing with insistence. At a glance, Mr. Wilding recognized Captain Venner, raised to the rank of colonel by Monmouth on the way from Holland. Trenchard dismounted, and taking a distracted stable boy by the arm, bade him see to their horses. The fellow endeavored to swing himself free of the other's tenacious grasp. "Let me go," he cried. "I am for the Duke." "And so are we, my fine rebel," answered Trenchard, holding fast. "Let me go," the lout insisted. "I am going to enlist." "And so you shall when you have stabled our nags. See to him, Valancy. He is brain sick with the fumes of war." The fellow protested, but Trenchard's way was brisk and short, and so, protesting still, he led away their cattle in the end, Valancy going with him to see that he performed this last duty as a stable boy ere he too became a champion militant of the Protestant cause. Trenchard sped after Wilding, who was elbowing his way through the yokels about the steps. The glare of a newly lighted lamp from the doorway fell full upon his long white face as he advanced, and Venner espied and recognized him. "Mr. Wilding," he cried, and there was a glad ring in his voice. For though cobblers, tailors, deserters from the militia, pot boys, stable boys, and shuffling yokels had been coming in numbers during the past few hours since the declaration had been read, this was the first gentleman that arrived to welcome Monmouth. The soldier stretched out a hand to grasp the newcomers. "His Grace will see you this instant, not a doubt of it." He turned and called down the passage, "Cragg." A young man in a buff coat came forward, and to him Venner delivered Wilding and Trenchard that he might announce them to his Grace. In the room that had been set apart for him, above stairs, Monmouth still sat at table. He had just supped, with but an indifferent appetite, so fevered was he by the events of his landing. He was excited with hope, inspired by the readiness with which the men of Lyme and its neighborhood had flocked to his banner, and fretted by anxiety that none of the gentry of the vicinity should yet have followed the example of the meaner folk, in answer to the messages dispatched at dawn from Seaton. The board at which he sat was still cumbered with some glasses and platters and vestiges of his repast. Below him on his right sat Ferguson, that prince of plotters, very busy with pen and ink, his keen face almost hidden by his great periwig. Opposite were Lord Grey of Werka and Andrew Fletcher of Saltoun, whilst standing at the foot of the table barely within the circle of candlelight from the branch on the polished oak was Nathaniel Wade, the lawyer who had fled to Holland on account of his alleged complicity in the Rye House plot, and was now returned a major in the Duke's service. Erect and soldierly a figure, girt with a great sword and with the butt of a pistol protruding from his belt, he had little the air of a man whose methods of contention were forensic. "You understand, then, Major Wade," his Grace was saying, his voice pleasant and musical. "It is decided that the guns had best be got ashore forthwith and mounted." Wade bowed. "I shall set about it at once, your Grace. I shall not want for help. Have I your Grace's leave to go?" Monmouth nodded, and as Wade passed out, Ensign Cragg entered to announce Mr. Wilding and Mr. Trenchard. The Duke rose to his feet, his glance suddenly brightening. Fletcher and Grey rose with him. Ferguson paid no heed, absorbed in his task, which he industriously continued. "At last!" exclaimed the Duke. "Admit them, sir." When they entered, Wilding coming first, his hat under his arm, the Duke sprang to meet him, a tall young figure, lithe and slender as a blade of steel, and of a steely strength for all his slimness. He was dressed in a suit of purple that became him marvelously well, and on his breast a star of diamonds flashed and smoldered like a thing of fire. He was an exceeding beauty of face, wherein he mainly favored that bold, handsome woman that was his mother, without, however, any of his mother's insipidity. Fine eyes, a good nose, straight and slender, and a mouth which, if sensual and indicating a lack of strength, was beautifully shaped. His chin was slightly cleft, the shape of his face a delicate oval, framed now in the waving masses of his brown wig. Some likeness to his late Majesty was also discernible, in spite of the wart, out of which his Uncle James made so much capital. There was a slight flush on his cheeks, an added luster in his eye, as he took Wilding's hand and shook it heartily before Wilding had time to kiss his Grace's. "You are late," he said, but there was no reproach in his voice. "We had looked to find you here when we came ashore. You had my letter?" "I had not, your Grace," answered Wilding, very grave. "It was stolen." "Stolen?" cried the Duke, and behind him Grey pressed forward, whilst even Ferguson paused in his writing to raise his piercing eyes and listen. "It is no matter," Wilding reassured him. "Although stolen, it has but gone to Whitehall today, when it can add little to the news that is already on its way there." The Duke laughed softly, with a flash of white teeth, and looked past Wilding at Trenchard. Some of the light faded out of his eyes. "They told me, Mr. Trenchard," he began, when Wilding, half turning to his friend, explained, "This is Mr. Nicholas Trenchard, John Trenchard's cousin." "I bid you welcome, sir," said the Duke very agreeably, "and I trust your cousin follows you." "Alas," said Trenchard. "My cousin is in France." And in a few brief words, he related the matter of John Trenchard's homecoming on his acquittal and the trouble there had been connected with it. The Duke received the news in silence. He had expected good support from old Speke's son-in-law. Indeed, there was a promise that when he came, John Trenchard would bring 1,500 men from Taunton. He took a turn in the room deep in thought, and there was a pause until Ferguson, rubbing his great Roman nose, asked suddenly had Mr. Wilding seen the declaration. Mr. Wilding had not, and thereupon the plotting parson, who was proud of his composition, would have read it to him there and then, but that Gray sourly told him the matter would keep, and that they had other things to discuss with Mr. Wilding. This the Duke himself confirmed, stating that there were matters on which he would be glad to have their opinion. He invited the newcomers to draw chairs to the table. Glasses were called for, and a couple of fresh bottles of Canary went round the board. The talk was desultory for a few moments, whilst Wilding and Trenchard washed the dust from their throats. Then Monmouth broke the ice by asking them bluntly what they thought of his coming thus, earlier than was at first agreed. Wilding never hesitated in his reply. "Frankly, your grace," said he, "I like it not all." Fletcher looked up sharply, his clear, intelligent eyes full upon Wilding's calm face, his countenance expressing as little as did Wilding's. Ferguson seemed slightly taken aback. Gray's thick lips were twisted in a sneering smile. "Faith," said the latter with elaborate sarcasm, "in that case it only remains for us to ship again, heave anchor, and back to Holland." "It is what I should advise," said Wilding slowly and quietly, "if I thought there was a chance of my advice being taken." He had a calm, almost apathetic way of uttering startling things, which rendered them doubly startling. The sneer seemed to freeze on Lord Gray's lips. Fletcher continued to stare, but his eyes had grown more round. Ferguson scowled darkly. The Duke's boyish face, it was still very youthful despite his 36 years, expressed a wondering consternation. He looked at Wilding, and from Wilding to the others, and his glance seemed to entreat them to suggest an answer to him. It was Gray at last who took the matter up. "You shall explain your meaning, sir, or we must hold you a traitor," he exclaimed. "King James does that already," answered Wilding with a quiet smile. "Do you mean the Duke of York?" rumbled Ferguson's Scottish accent with startling suddenness, and Monmouth nodded approval of the correction. "If ye mean that bloody papist and fratricide, it were well so to speak of him, had ye read the declaration." But Fletcher cropped his speech in mid-growth. He was ever a short-tempered man, intolerant of irrelevancies. "It were well, perhaps," said he, his accent abundantly proclaiming him a fellow countryman of Ferguson's, "to keep to the matter before us. Mr. Wilding, no doubt, will state the reasons that exist, or that he fancies may exist, for giving advice which is hardly worthy of the cause to which he stands committed." "Aye, Fletcher," said Monmouth, "there is sense in you. Tell us what is in your mind, Mr. Wilding." "It is in my mind, your grace, that this invasion is rash, premature, and ill-advised." "Odds life!" cried Gray, and he swung angrily round fully to face the Duke, the nostrils of his heavy nose dilating. "Are we to listen to this milksop prattle?" Nick Trenchard, who had hitherto been silent, cleared his throat so noisily that he drew all eyes to himself. "Your grace," Mr. Wilding pursued, his air calm and dignified, and gathering more dignity from the circumstance that he proceeded as if there had been no interruption. "When I had the honor of conferring with you at The Hague 2 months ago, it was agreed that you should spend the summer in Sweden, away from politics and scheming, leaving the work of preparation to your accredited agents here. That work I have been slowly but surely pushing forward. It was not to be hurried. Men of position are not to be won over in a day. Men with anything to lose need some guarantee that they are not wantonly casting their possessions to the winds. By next spring, as was agreed, all would have been ready. Delay could not have hurt you. Indeed, with every day by which you delayed your coming, you did good service to your cause. You strengthened its prospect of success. For every day the people's burden of oppression and persecution grows more heavy, and the people's temper more short. Every day, by the methods that he is pursuing, King James brings himself into deeper hatred. This hatred is spreading. It was the business of myself and those others to help it on, until from the cottage of the plowman the infection of anger should have spread to the mansion of the squire. Had your grace but given me time, as I entreated you, and as you promised me, You might have marched to Whitehall with scarce the shedding a drop of blood, had your grace but waited until we were ready. England would have so trembled at your landing that your uncle's throne would have toppled over 'neath the shock. As it is, he shrugged his shoulders, sighed, and spread his hands, leaving his sentence uncompleted. Monmouth sat sober by these sober words. The intoxication that had come to him from the little measure of success that had attended the opening of the listing on Church Cliffs deserted him now. He saw the thing stark and in its true proportions, and not even the shouting of the folk in the streets below, crying his name and acclaiming him their champion, served to lighten the gloom that Wilding's words cast like a cloud over his volatile heart. Alas, poor Monmouth, he was ever a weathercock, and even as Wilding's words seemed to strike the courage out of him, so did Gray's short, contemptuous answer restore it. As it is, we'll thrust it thrown over with our hands, said he after a moment's pause. Aye, cried Monmouth, we'll do it, God helping us. Our dependence and trust is in the Lord of hosts, in whose name we go forth, boomed the voice of Ferguson, quoting from his precious declaration. The Lord will do that which seemeth good unto him. An unanswerable argument, said Wilding, smiling, but the Lord, I am told by the gentleman of your cloth, works in his own good time, and my fears are all lest, finding us unprepared of ourselves, the Lord's good time be not yet. Out on ye, sir, cried Ferguson, ye want for reverence. Common sense will serve us better at the moment, answered Wilding with a touch of sharpness. He turned to the frowning and perplexed Duke, whose mind was being tossed this way and that, like a shuttlecock upon the battledore of these men's words. Your Grace, he said, forgive me that I speak it if here you will, or forbid me to say it if your resolve is unalterable in this matter. It is unalterable, answered Gray for the Duke, but Monmouth gently overruled him for once. Nevertheless, speak by all means, Mr. Wilding. Whatever you may say, you need have no fear that any of us can doubt your good intentions to ourselves. I thank your Grace. What I have to say is but a repetition of the first words I uttered at this table. I would urge your Grace even now to retreat. What? Are you mad? It was Lord Grey who asked the impatient question. I doubt it's over late for that, said Fletcher slowly. I am not so sure, answered Wilding, but I am sure that to attempt it with a safer course, the surer in the end. I myself may not linger to push forward the task of stirring up the people, for I am already something more than under suspicion. But there are others who will remain to carry on the work after I have departed with your Grace. If your Grace thinks well, from the continent by correspondence we can mature our plans. In a 12-month things will be very different, and we can return with confidence. Gray shrugged and turned his shoulder upon Wilding, but said no word. There was silence of some few moments. Andrew Fletcher leaned his elbow on the table and took his brow in his great bony hand. Wilding's words seemed an echo of those he himself had spoken a week or two ago, only to be overruled by Gray, who swayed the Duke more than did any other, and that he did not do so of fell purpose, and seeking deliberately to work Monmouth's ruin, no man will ever be able to say with certainty. Ferguson rose, a tall, spare, stooping figure, and smote the board with his fist. It is a good cause, he cried, and God will not leave us unless we leave him. Henry VII landed with fewer men than did your Grace, said Gray, and he succeeded. True, put in Fletcher, but Henry VII was sure of the support of not a few of the nobility, which does not seem to be our case. Ferguson and Gray stared at him in horror. Monmouth sat biting his lip, more bewildered than thoughtful. O man of little faith, roared Ferguson in a passion, are ye to be swayed like a straw in the wind? I am no swayed. Ye ken this was ever my own view. I feel in my heart that what Mr. Wilding says is right. It is but what I said myself, and Captain Matthews with me, before we embarked upon this expedition. We were in danger of ruining all by a needless precipitancy. Nay, man, never stare so, he said to Gray. I am in it now, and I am no the man to draw back, nor do I go so far as Mr. Wilding in counseling such a course. We've set our hands to the plow. Let us go forward in God's name. Yet I would remind you that what Mr. Wilding says is true. Had we waited until next year, we have found the usurper's throne tottering under him, and on our landing, it would have toppled over of itself. I have said already that we'll overset it with our hands, Gray answered. How many hands have you? Asked a new voice, a crisp, discordant voice, much steeped in mockery. It was Nick Trenchard's. "Have we another here, Mr. Wilding's mind?" cried Gray, staring at him. "I am seldom of any other," answered Trenchard. "We shall no want for hands," Ferguson assured him. "Had ye arrived earlier, ye might have seen how readily men enlisted." He had risen and approached the window as he spoke. He pulled it open to let in the full volume of sound that rose from the street below. "A Monmouth! A Monmouth!" voices shouted. Ferguson struck a theatrical posture, one long, lean arm stretched outward from the shoulder. "Ye hear them, sirs," he cried, and there was a gleam of triumph in his eye. "That is answer enough to those who want for faith, to the feckless ones that think the Lord will abandon those that are set out to serve him." And his glance comprehended Fletcher, Trenchard, and Wilding. The Duke stirred in his chair, stretched a hand for bottle, and filled a glass. His mercurial spirits were rising again. He smiled at Wilding. "I think you are answer, sir," said he, "and I hope that, like Fletcher there, who shared your doubts, you will come to agree that since we have set our hands to the plow, we must go forward. I have said that which I had it on my conscience to say. Your grace may have found me over-ready with my counsel. At least you shall find me no less ready with my sword." "Odso, that is better." Gray applauded, and his manner was almost pleasant. "I never doubted it, Mr. Wilding," his grace replied. "But I should like to hear you say that you are convinced, at least in part," and he waved his hand toward the window. It was almost as if he pleaded for encouragement. In common with most men who came in contact with Wilding, he had felt the latent force of this man's nature, the strength that was hidden under that calm surface, and the acuteness of the judgment that must be wedded to it. He longed to have the word of such a man that his enterprise was not as desperate as Wilding had seemed at first painted. But Wilding made no concession to hopes or desires when he dealt with facts. "Men will flock to you, no doubt. Persecution has wearied many of the country folk, and they are ready for revolt. But they're all untrained in arms. They are rustics, not soldiers. If any of the men in position were to rally round your standard, they would bring the militia and others in their train. They would bring arms, horses, and money, all of which your grace must be sorely needing." "They will come," answered the Duke. "Some, no doubt," Wilding agreed. "But had it been next year, I would have answered for it that it would have been no handful had ridden in to welcome you. Scarce a gentleman of Devon or Somerset, of Dorset or Hampshire, of Wiltshire or Cheshire, but would have hastened to your side." "They will come as it is," the Duke repeated with an almost womanish insistence, persisting in believing what he hoped, all evidence apart. The door opened and Ensign Cragg made his appearance. "May it please your grace," he announced. "Mr. Badiscombe has just arrived, and asks will your grace receive him tonight?" "Badiscombe!" cried the Duke. Again his cheek flushed and his eye sparkled. "Aye, in heaven's name, show him up." "And may the Lord refresh us with good tidings," prayed Ferguson devoutly. Monmouth turned to Wilding. "It is the agent I sent ahead of me from Holland to stir up the gentry from here to the Mersey." "I know," said Wilding. "We conferred together some weeks since. Now you shall see how idle are your fears," the Duke promised him. And Wilding, who was better informed on that score, kept silence. Chapter 14. His Grace in Council. Mr. Christopher Badiscombe, that mild-mannered Dorchester gentleman, who, like Wade, was by vocation a lawyer, was ushered into the Duke's presence. He was dressed in black, and, like Ferguson, was almost smothered in a great periwig, which he may have adopted for purposes of disguise rather than adornment. Certainly, he had none of that air of the soldier of fortune which distinguished his brother of the robe. He advanced, hat in hand, towards the table, greeting the company about it, and Wilding observed that he wore silk stockings and shoes upon which there rested not a speck of dust. Mr. Badiscombe was plainly a man who loved his ease, since on such a day he had traveled to Lyme in a coach. The lawyer bent low to kiss the Duke's hand, and scarce was that formal homage paid than questions poured upon him from Gray, from Fletcher, and from Ferguson. "Gentlemen, gentlemen," the Duke entreated them, smiling, and remembering their manners they fell silent. As Wilding afterwards told Trenchard, they reminded him of a parcel of saucy lackeys who take liberties with an upstart master for whom they are wanting in respect. "I am glad to see you, Badiscombe," said Monmouth, when quiet was restored, "and I trust when beholding you a bearer of good tidings." The lawyer's full face was usually pale. Tonight it was, in addition, solemn, and the smile that haunted his lips was a courtesy smile that expressed neither mirth nor satisfaction. He cleared his throat, as if nervous. He avoided the Duke's question as to the quality of the news he brought by answering that he had made all haste to come to Lyme upon hearing of his Grace's landing. He was surprised, he said, as well he might be, for the arrangement was that having done his work, he was to return to Holland and report to Monmouth upon the feeling of the gentry. But your news, Badiscombe, the Duke insisted. Aye, put in Grey. In heaven's name, let us hear that. Again there was the little nervous cough from Badiscombe. I have scarce had time to complete my round of visits, he temporized. Your Grace has taken us so by surprise. I was with Sir Walter Young at Culloden when the news of your landing came some few hours ago. His voice faltered and seemed to die away. Well, cried the Duke. His brows were drawn together. Already he realized that Badiscombe's tidings were not good, else would he be hesitating less in uttering them. Is Sir Walter with you at least? I grieve to say that he is not. Not? It was Grey who spoke, and he followed the ejaculation by an oath. Why not? He is following, no doubt, suggested Fletcher. We may hope, sirs, answered Badiscombe, that in a few days we shall have seen the zeal of the countryside. He will be cured of his present lukewarmness. Thus discreetly did the man of law break the bad news he bore. Monmouth sank back into his chair like one who has lost some of his strength. Lukewarmness, he repeated dully. Sir Walter Young lukewarm. Even so, your Grace, alas, and Badiscombe sighed audibly. Ferguson's voice boomed forth again to startle them. The ox knoweth his owner, he cried. The ass his master's crib. But Israel doth not know, my people doth not consider. Grey pushed the bottle contemptuously across the table to the parson. Drink, man, and get sense, said he, and turned aside to question Badiscombe touching others of the neighborhood upon whom they had depended. What of Sir Francis Rawles? He inquired. Badiscombe answered the question, addressing himself to the Duke. Alas, Sir Francis, no doubt, would have been faithful to your Grace, but unfortunately, Sir Francis is in prison already. Deeper grew Monmouth's frown. His fingers drummed the table absently. Fletcher poured himself wine, his face inscrutable. Grey threw one leg over the other, and in a voice that was carefully careless he inquired, And what of Sidney Clifford? He is considering, said Badiscombe. I was to have seen him again at the end of the month. Meanwhile, he would take no resolve. Lord Gervas Scoresby? Questioned Grey less carelessly. Badiscombe half turned to him, then faced the Duke again as he made answer. Mr. Wilding there can tell you more concerning Lord Gervas. All eyes swept round to Wilding, who sat in silence, listening. Monmouth's were laden with inquiry and some anxiety. Wilding shook his head slowly, sadly. You must not depend upon him, he answered. Lord Gervas was not yet ripe. A little longer, and I think I must have won him for your Grace. Heaven help us, exclaimed the Duke in petulant vexation. Is no one coming in? Ferguson swung a hand towards a still open window, drawing attention to the sounds without. Does your Grace not hear that ye can ask? He cried, almost reproachfully. But they scarce heeded him, for Grey was inquiring if Mr. Strode might be depended upon to join, and that was a matter that claimed the greater attention. I think, said Badiscombe, that he might have been depended upon. Might have been? Questioned Fletcher, speaking now for the first time since Badiscombe's arrival. Like Sir Francis Rawles, he is in prison, the lawyer explained. Monmouth leaned forward, and his young face looked careworn now. He thrust a slender hand under the brown curls upon his brow. Will you tell us, Mr. Badiscombe, upon what friends you think that we may count? He said. Badiscombe pursed his lips a second, pondering. I think, said he, that you may count upon Mr. Legge and Mr. Hooper, and possibly upon Colonel Churchill, though I cannot say what following they will bring, if any. Mr. Trenchard, upon whom we counted for 1,500 men of Taunton, has been obliged to fly the country to escape arrest. We have heard that from Mr. Trenchard's cousin, answered the Duke. What of Prideaux of Ford? Is he lukewarm? I was unable to elicit a definite promise from him, but he was favorably disposed to your Grace. His Grace made a gesture that seemed to dismiss Prideaux from their calculations. And Mr. Hucker, Taunton? Badiscombe's manner grew yet more ill at ease. Mr. Hucker himself, I am sure, would place his sword at your disposal, but his brother is a red-hot Tory. Well, well, sighed the Duke, I take it we must not make certain of Mr. Hucker. Are there any others besides Legg and Hooper upon whom you think that we may reckon? Lord Wiltshire, perhaps, said Badiscombe, but with a lack of assurance. A plague on perhaps, exclaimed Monmouth, growing irritable. I want you to name the men of whom you are certain. Badiscombe stood silent for a moment, pondering. He looked almost foolish, like a schoolboy who hesitates to confess his ignorance of the answer to a question set him. Fletcher swung round, his gray eyes flashing angrily, his accent more Scottish than ever. Is it that ye rees certain o' none, Mr. Badiscombe? He exclaimed. Indeed, said Badiscombe, I think we may be fairly certain of Mr. Legg and Mr. Hooper. And of none besides, questioned Fletcher again. Be these the only representatives of the flower of England's nobility that is to flock to banner the cause of England's freedom and religion? Scorn was stamped on every word of his question. Badiscombe spread his hands, raised his brows, and said nothing. The Lord knows I do not say it exulting, said Fletcher, but I told your grace yours was hardly the case of Henry VII, as my Lord Grey would have you believe. We shall see, snapped Grey, scowling at the Scot. The people are coming in hundreds, aye, in thousands. The gentry will follow, they must. Make not too sure, your grace. Oh, make not too sure, Wilding besought the Duke. As I have said, these hinds have nothing to lose but their lives. Faith, can a man lose more? Asked Grey contemptuously. He disliked Wilding by instinct, which was but a reciprocation of the feeling with which Wilding was inspired by him. I think he can, said Mr. Wilding quietly. A man may lose honor. He may plunge his family into ruin. These are things of more weight with a gentleman than life. Odds death, blazed Grey, giving a free rein to his dislike of this calm gentleman. Do you suggest that a man's honor is imperiled in his Grace's service? I suggest nothing, answered Wilding, unmoved. What I think, I state. If I thought a man's honor imperiled in this service, you would not see me at this table now. I can make you no more convincing answer. Grey laughed unpleasantly, and Wilding, a faint tinge on his cheekbones, measured him with a stern, intrepid look before which his lordship's shifty glance was observed to fall. Wilding's eye, having achieved that much, passed from him to the Duke, and its expression softened. Your Grace sees, said he, how well founded were the fears I expressed that your coming has been premature. In God's name, what would you have me do? Cried the Duke, and petulance made his voice unsteady. Mr. Wilding rose, moved out of his habitual calm by the earnestness that pervaded him. It is not for me to say again what I would have your Grace do. Your Grace has heard my views and those of these gentlemen. It is for your Grace to decide. You mean whether I will go forward with this thing? What alternative have I? No alternative. Putting Grey with finality. Nor is alternative needed. We'll carry this through in spite of timorous folk and birds of ill omen that croak to affright us. Our service is the service of the Lord, cried Ferguson, returning from the window in the embrasure which he had been standing. The Lord cannot but destine it to prevail. Ye said so before, quoth Fletcher testily. We need here men, money, and weapons, not divinity. You are plainly infected with Mr. Wilding's disease, sneered Grey. Ford, cried the Duke, who saw Wilding's eyes flash fire. You go too fast. Mr. Wilding, you will not heed his lordship. I should not be likely to do so, your Grace, answered Wilding, who had resumed his seat. What shall that mean? Quoth Grey, leaping to his feet. Make it quite clear to him, Tony, whispered Trenchard coaxingly. But Mr. Wilding was not as lost as were these immediate followers of the Duke's to all sense of the respect due to his Grace. I think, said Wilding quietly, that you have forgotten something. Forgotten what? Bawled Grey. His Grace's presence. His lordship turned crimson. His anger swelled to think that the very terms of rebuke precluded his allowing his feelings a free rein. Monmouth leaned forward. Sit down, he said to Grey, and Grey, so lately called to the respect he owed his Grace, obeyed him. You will both promise me that this affair shall go no further. I know you will do it if I ask you, particularly when you remember how few are the followers upon whom I may depend. I am not in case to lose either of you through foolish words uttered in a heat which, in both your hearts, is born, I know, of your loyalty to me." Gray's coarse, elderly face took on a sulky look. His heavy lips were pouted, his glance sullen. Mr. Wilding, on the contrary, smiled across the table. "For my part, one very gladly give your grace the undertaking," said he, and took care not to observe the sneer that altered the line of Lord Gray's lips. His lordship, too, was forced to give the same pledge, and he followed it up by inveighing sturdily against the suggestion that they should retreat. "I do protest," he exclaimed, "that those who advise your grace to do anything but go forward boldly now are evil counselors. If you put back to Holland, you may leave every hope behind. There will be no second coming for you. Your influence will have been dissipated. Men will not trust you another time. I do not think that even Mr. Wilding can deny the truth of this." "I am by no means sure," said Wilding, and Fletcher looked at him with eyes that were full of understanding. This sturdy Scot, the only soldier worthy of the name in the Duke's following, who, ever since the project had first been mooted, had held out against it, counseling delay, was in sympathy with Mr. Wilding. Monmouth rose, his face anxious, his voice fretful. "There can be no retreat for me, gentlemen. Though many that we depended upon are not here to join us, yet let us remember that heaven is on our side, and that we are come to fight in the sacred cause of religion and a nation's emancipation from the thraldom of popery, oppression, and superstition. Let this dispel such doubts as yet may linger in our minds." His words had a brave sound, but when analyzed, they but formed a paraphrase of what Gray and Ferguson had said. It was his destiny to be a mere echo of the minds of other men, just as he was now the tool of these two, one of whom plotted, seemingly, because plotting was a disease that had got into his blood, the other for reasons that may have been of ambition or of revenge. No man will ever know for certain. In the chamber they shared, Trenchard and Mr. Wilding reviewed that night the scene so lately enacted, in which one had taken active part, the other been little more than a spectator. Trenchard had come from the Duke's presence entirely out of conceit with Monmouth and his cause, contemptuous of Ferguson, angry with Gray, and indifferent towards Fletcher. "I am committed, and I'll not draw back," said he. "But I tell you, Anthony, my heart is not confederate with my hand in this." "Bah!" he railed. "We serve a man of straw, a Perkin, a very pope of a fellow." Mr. Wilding sighed. "He's scarce the man for such an undertaking," said he. "I fear we have been misled." Trenchard was drawing off his boots. He paused in the act. "Aye," said he, "misled by our blindness. What else, after all, should we have expected of him?" he cried contemptuously. "The cause is good, but its leader, pshaw! Would you have such a puppet as that on the throne of England? He does not aim so high. Be not so sure. We shall hear more of the black box anon, and of the marriage certificate it contains. 'Twould not surprise me if they were to produce forgeries of the one, and the other to prove his father's marriage to Lucy Walters. Anthony, Anthony, to what a business are we wedded?" Mr. Wilding, already abed, turned impatiently. Things cried aloud to be redressed. A leader was necessary and none other offered. That is the whole story. But our chance is slender, and it might have been great. That rake hell, Ford, Lord Gray has made it so, grumbled Trenchard, busy with his stockings. This sudden coming is his work. You heard what Fletcher said, how he opposed it when first it was urged. He paused and looked up suddenly. "Blister me," he cried. "Is it his lordship's purpose, think you, to work the ruin of Monmouth? What are you saying, Nick?" "There are certain rumors current touching his grace and Lady Gray. A man like Gray might well resort to some such scheme of vengeance." "Get to sleep, Nick," said Wilding, yawning. "You are dreaming already. Such a plan would be over-elaborate for his lordship's mind. It would ask a villainy parallel with your own." Trenchard climbed into bed and settled himself under the coverlet. "Maybe," said he, "and maybe not. But I think that were it not for that cursed business of the letter Richard Westmacott stole from us, I should be going my ways tomorrow and leaving his Grace of Monmouth to go his." And I'd go with you," answered Wilding. "I've little taste for suicide, but we are in it now. 'Twas a sad pity you meddled this morning in that affair at Taunton," mused Trenchard wistfully. "A sadder pity you were bitten with a taste for matrimony," he added thoughtfully, and blew out the rushlight. Chapter 15. Lime of the King. On the next day, which was Friday, the country folk continued to come in, and by evening Monmouth's forces amounted to 1,000 foot and 150 horse. The men were armed as fast as they were enrolled, and scarce a field or quiet avenue in the district but resounded to the tramp of feet, the rattle of weapons, and the sharp orders of the officers who, by drilling, were converting this raw material into soldiers. On the Saturday, the rally of the Duke's standard was such that Monmouth threw off at last the gloomy forebodings that had burdened his soul since that meeting on Thursday night. Wade, Holmes, Fawkes, and Fox were able to set about forming the first 4 regiments. The Dukes in the green, the white, and the yellow. Monmouth's spirits continued to rise, for he had been joined by Legge and Hooper, the 2 upon whom Battiscombe had counted, and by Colonel Joshua Churchill, of whom Battiscombe had been less certain. Captain Matthews brought news that Lord Wiltshire and the gentlemen of Hampshire might be expected if they could force their way through Albemarle's militia, which was already closing round Lyme. Long before evening, willing fellows were being turned away in hundreds for lack of weapons. In spite of Monmouth's big talk on landing and of the rumor that had gone out that he could arm 30,000 men, his stock of arms was exhausted by a mere 1,500. Trenchard, who now held a major's rank and the horse attached to the Duke's own regiment, was loud in his scorn of the state of things. Mr. Wilding was sad, and his depression again spread to the Duke after few words had passed between them towards evening. Fletcher was for heroic measures. He looked only ahead now, like the good soldier that he was, and already he began to suggest a bold dash for Exeter, for weapons, horses, and possibly the militia as well, for they had ample evidence that the men composing it might easily be induced to desert to the Duke's side. The suggestion was one that instantly received Mr. Wilding's heartiest approval. It seemed to fill him suddenly with hope, and he spoke of it, indeed, as an inspiration which, if acted upon, might yet save the situation. The Duke was undecided as ever. He was too much troubled weighing the chances for and against, and he would decide upon nothing until he consulted Grey and the others. He would summon a council that night, he promised, and the matter should be considered. But that council was never to be called, for Andrew Fletcher's association with the rebellion was drawing rapidly to its close, and there was that to happen in the next few hours which should counteract all the encouragement with which the Duke had been fortified that day. Towards evening, little Heywood Dare, the Taunton goldsmith, who had landed at Seaton and gone out with the news of the Duke's arrival, rode into Lyme with 40 horse, mounted, himself, upon a beautiful charger which was destined to be the undoing of him. News came, too, that the Dorset militia were at Bridport, 8 miles away, whereupon Wilding and Fletcher postponed all further suggestion of the dash for Exeter, proposing that in the meantime a night attack upon Bridport might result well. For once Lord Grey was in agreement with them, and so the matter was decided. Fletcher went down to arm and mount, and all the world knows the story of the foolish, ill-fated quarrel which robbed Monmouth of 2 of his most valued adherents. By ill luck the Scots' eyes lighted upon the fine horse that Dare had brought from Ford Abbey. It occurred to him that nothing could be more fitting than that the best man should sit upon the best horse, and he forthwith led the beast in the stables and was about to mount when Dare came forward to catch him in the very act. The goldsmith was a rude, peppery fellow, who did not mince his words. "What a plague are you doing with that horse?" he cried. Fletcher paused, 1 foot in the stirrup, and looked the fellow up and down. "I am mounting it," said he, and proceeded to do as he said. But Dare caught him by the tails of his coat and brought him back to earth. "You are making a mistake, Mr. Fletcher," he cried angrily. "That horse is mine." Fletcher, whose temper was by no means of the most peaceful, kept himself with difficulty in hand at the indignity Dare offered him. "Yours," quoth he. "Aye, mine. I brought it from Ford Abbey myself." "For the Duke's service," Fletcher reminded him. "For my own, sir, for my own I would have you know." And brushing the Scot aside, he caught the bridle and sought to wrench it from Fletcher's hand. But Fletcher maintained his hold. "Softly, Mr. Dare," said he. "Ye re a trifle o'er true to your name, as you once told his late majesty yourself. Take your hand from my horse." Dare shouted, very angry. Several loiterers in the yard gathered round to watch the scene, culling diversion from it and speculating upon the conclusion it might have. One rash young fellow offered audibly to lay 10 to 1 that Paymaster Dare would have the best of the argument. Dare overheard and was spurred on. "I will, by God," he answered. "Come, Mr. Fletcher." And he shook the bridle again. There was a dull flush showing through the tan of Fletcher's skin. "Mr. Dare," said he, "this horse is no more yours than mine. It is the Duke's, and I, as one of the leaders, claim it in the Duke's service." "Aye, sir," cried an onlooker, encouraging Fletcher, and did the mischief. It so goaded Dare to have his antagonist in this trifling matter supported that he utterly lost his head. "I have said the horse is mine, and I repeat it. Let go the bridle, let it go." Still Fletcher, striving hard to keep his calm, clung to the reins. "Let it go, you damned, thieving Scot!" screamed Dare in fury, and struck Fletcher with his whip. It was unfortunate for them both that he should have had that switch in his hand at such a time, but more unfortunate still was it that Fletcher should have had a pistol in his belt. The Scot dropped the bridle at last, dropped it to pluck forth the weapon. "Hi! I did not," began Dare, who had stood appalled by what he had done in the second or two that had passed since he had delivered the blow. The rest of his sentence was drowned in the report of Fletcher's pistol, and Dare dropped dead on the rough cobbles of the yard. Ferguson has left it on record, and presumably he had Fletcher's word for it. There was no part of the Scot intent to do Mr. Dare mischief. He had but drawn the pistol to intimidate him into better manners, but in his haste he accidentally pulled the trigger. However that may be, there was Dare as dead as the stones on which he lay, and Fletcher with a smoking pistol in his hand. After that all was confusion. Fletcher was seized by those who had witnessed the deed. There was none thought an accident. Indeed, they were all ready enough to say that Fletcher had received excessive provocation. He was haled to the presence of the Duke, with whom were Grey and Wilding at the time, and old Dare's son, an ensign in good Enoch's company. Came clamoring for vengeance, backed by such goodly numbers that the distraught Duke was forced to show at least the outward seeming of it. Wilding, who knew the value of this Scottish soldier of fortune who had seen so much service, strenuously urged his enlargement. It was not a time to let the fortunes of a cause suffer through such an act as this. Deplorable though it might be, the evidence showed that Fletcher had been provoked. He had been struck, a thing that might well justify the anger and the heat of which he had done this thing. Grey was stolid and silent, saying nothing either for or against the man who had divided with him under the Duke the honors of the supreme command. Monmouth, white and horror-stricken, sat and listened first to Wilding, then to Dare, and lastly to Fletcher himself. But it was young Dare and his followers, who prevailed. They were too numerous and turbulent, and they must at all costs be conciliated, or there was no telling to what extremes they might not go. And so there was an end to the share of Andrew Fletcher of Saltoun in this undertaking, the end of the only man who was of any capacity to pilot it through the troubled waters that lay before it. Monmouth placed him under arrest and sent him aboard the frigate again, ordering her captain to sail at once. That was the utmost Monmouth could do to save him. Wilding continued to plead with the Duke after Fletcher's removal, and to such good purpose that at last Monmouth determined that Fletcher should rejoin them later, when the affair should have blown over, and he sent word accordingly to the Scot. Even in this there were manifestations of antagonism between Mr. Wilding and Lord Grey, and it almost seemed enough that Wilding should suggest a course for Lord Grey instantly to oppose it. The effects of Fletcher's removal were not long in following. On the morrow came the Bridport affair, and Grey's shameful conduct when, had he stood his ground, victory must have been assured the Duke's forces instead of just that honorable retreat by which Colonel Wade so gallantly saved the situation. Mr. Wilding did not mince his words in putting it that Grey had run away. In his room at the George in Monmouth, deeply distressed, asked Wilding and Colonel Matthews what action he should take in the matter, how deal with Grey. "There is no other general in Europe would ask that, your Grace," answered Matthews gravely, and Mr. Wilding added without an instant's hesitation that his Grace's course was plain. It would be an unwise thing to expose the troops to the chance of more such happenings. Monmouth dismissed him and sent for Grey, and he seemed resolved to deal with him as he deserved. Yet an hour later, when Wilding, Matthews, Wade, and the others were ordered to attend the Duke in council, there was his lordship seemingly on as good terms as ever with his Grace. They were assembled to discuss the next step, which it might be advisable to take, for the militia was closing in around them, and to remain longer in line would be to be caught there as in a trap. It was Grey who advanced the first suggestion, his assurance no whit abetted by the shameful thing that had befallen, by the cowardice which he had betrayed. "That we must quit Lyme we are all agreed," said he. "I would propose that your Grace march north to Gloucester, where our Cheshire friends will assemble to meet us." Colonel Matthews reminded the Duke of Andrew Fletcher's proposal that they should make a raid upon Exeter with a view to seizing arms, of which they stood so sorely in need. This Mr. Wilding was quick to support. "Not only that, your grace," he said, "but I am confident that with very little inducement the greater portion of the militia will desert to us as soon as we appear." "What assurance can you give of that?" asked Gray, his heavy lip protruded. "I take it," said Mr. Wilding, "that in such matters no man can give an assurance of anything. I speak with knowledge of the country and the folk from which the militia is enlisted. I offer as my opinion that the militia is favorably disposed to your grace. I can do no more. If Mr. Wilding says so, your grace," put in Matthews, "I have no doubt he has sound reasons upon which to base his opinion." "No doubt," said Monmouth. "Indeed, I had already thought of the step that you suggest, Colonel Matthews, and what Mr. Wilding says causes me to look upon it still more favorably." Gray frowned. "Consider, your grace," he said earnestly, "that you are in no case to fight at present." "What fighting do you suggest there would be?" asked the Duke. "There is Albemarle between us and Exeter. But with the militia," Wilding reminded him, "and if the militia deserts him for your grace, in what case will Albemarle find himself? And if the militia does not desert? If you should be proven wrong, sir, what then?" "What then?" asked Gray. "Aye, true. What then, Mr. Wilding?" quoth the Duke, already wavering. Wilding considered a moment, all eyes upon him. "Even then," said he presently, "I do maintain that in this dash for Exeter lies your grace's greatest chance of success. We can deliver battle, if need be. Already we are 3,000 strong." Gray interrupted him rudely. "Nay," he insisted, "you must not presume upon that. We are not yet fit to fight. It is his grace's business at present to drill and discipline his troops, and induce more friends to join him. Already we are turning men away because we have no weapons to put into their hands," Wilding reminded them, and a murmur of approval ran round, which would serve to anger Gray the more, to render more obstinate his opposition. "But all that come in are not unprovided," was his lordship's retort. "There are the Hampshire gentry and their friends. They will come armed, and so will others if we have patience." "Aye," said Wilding, "and if you have patience enough there will be troops the Parliament will send against us. They, too, will be armed, I can assure your lordship." "In God's name let us keep from wrangling," the Duke besought them. "It is difficult enough to determine for the best. If the dash to Exeter were successful—" "It cannot be," Gray interrupted again. The liberties he took with Monmouth, and which Monmouth permitted him, might well be a source of wonder to all who heard them. Monmouth paused now in his interrupted speech, and looked about him a trifle wearily. "It seems idle to insist," said Mr. Wilding, "such is the temper of your grace's counselors, that we get no further than contradictions." Gray's bold eyes were upon Wilding as he spoke. "I would remind your grace, and I am sure that many present will agree with me, that in a desperate enterprise a sudden, unexpected movement will often strike terror." "That is true," said Monmouth, but apparently without enthusiasm, and having approved what was urged on one side. He looked at Gray, as if waiting to hear what might be said on the other. His indecision was pitiful, tragical, indeed, in the leader of so bold an enterprise. "We should do better, I think," said Gray, "to deal with the facts as we know them." "It is what I am endeavoring to do, your grace," protested Wilding, a note of despair in his voice. "Perhaps some other gentleman will put forward better counsel than mine." "Aye, in heaven's name let us hope so," snorted Gray, and Monmouth, catching the sudden flash of Mr. Wilding's eye, set a hand upon his lordship's arm, as if to urge him to be gentler. But he continued, "When men talk of striking terror by sudden movements, they build on air." "I had hardly thought to hear that from your lordship," said Mr. Wilding, and he permitted himself that tight-lipped smile that gave his face so wicked a look. "And why not?" asked Gray, stupidly unsuspicious. "Because I thought you might have concluded otherwise from your own experience at Bridport this morning." Gray got angrily to his feet, rage and shame flushing his face, and it needed Ferguson and the Duke to restore him some semblance of calm. Indeed, it may well be that it was to complete this that his grace decided there and then that they should follow Gray's advice and go by way of Taunton, Bridgewater, and Bristol to Gloucester. He was, like all weak men, of conspicuous mental short-sightedness. The matter of the moment was ever of greater importance to him than any result that might attend it in the future. He insisted that Wilding and Gray should shake hands before the breaking up of that most astounding council. And as he had done last night, he now again imposed upon them his commands that they must not allow this matter to go further. Mr. Wilding paved the way for peace by making an apology within limitations. If, in my zeal to serve your grace to the best of my ability, I have said that which Lord Grey thinks fit to resent, I would bid him consider my motive rather than my actual words. But when all had gone save Ferguson, the chaplain approached the preoccupied and distressed Duke with counsel that Mr. Wilding should be sent away from the army. Else there be trouble twixt him and Grey, the plotting parson foretold. We'll be having a repetition of the unfortunate Fletcher and Dare affair, and I think that has cost your grace enough already. Do you suggest that I dismiss Wilding? Cried the Duke. You know his influence, and the bad impression his removal would leave. Ferguson stroked his long, lean jaw. No, no, said he. All I suggest is that you find Mr. Wilding work to do elsewhere. Elsewhere? The Duke questioned. Where else? I have thought of that, too. Send him to London to see Danvers and to stir up your friends there. And, he added, lowering his voice, give him discretion to see Sunderland if he thinks well. The proposition pleased Monmouth, and it seemed to please Mr. Wilding no less when, having sent for him, the Duke communicated it to him in Ferguson's presence. Upon this mission, Mr. Wilding set out that very night, leaving Nick Trenchard in despair at being separated from him at a time when there seemed to be every chance that such a separation might be eternal. Monmouth and Ferguson may have conceived they did a wise thing in removing a man who was instinctively spoiling for a little swordplay with my Lord Grey. It is odds that had he remained, the brewing storm between the pair would have come to a head. Had it done so, it is more than likely, from what we know of Mr. Wilding's accomplishments, that he had given Lord Grey his quietus. And had that happened, it is to be inferred from history that it is possible the Duke of Monmouth's rebellion might have had a less disastrous issue. Chapter 16. Plots and Plotters. Mr. Wilding left Monmouth's army at Lyme on Sunday, the 14th of June, and rejoined it at Bridgewater exactly 3 weeks later. In the meanwhile, a good deal had happened, yet the happenings on every hand had fallen far short of the expectations aroused in Mr. Wilding's mind, now by one circumstance, now by another. In reaching London, he had experienced no difficulty. Men traveling in that direction were not subjected to the scrutiny that fell to share those traveling from it towards the west, or rather, to the scrutiny ordained by the government. For Wilding had more than one opportunity of observing how very lax and indifferent were the constables and tithing men, particularly in Somerset and Wiltshire, in the performance of this duty. Wayfarers were questioned as a matter of form, but in no case did Wilding hear of anyone being detained upon suspicion. This was calculated to raise his drooping hopes, pointing as it did to the general favoring of Monmouth that was toward. He grew less despondent on the score of the Duke's possible ultimate success, and he came to hope that the efforts he went to exert would not be fruitless. But rude were the disappointments that awaited him in town. London, like the rest of the country, was not ready. There were not wanting men who favored Monmouth, but no rising had been organized, and the Duke's partisans were not disposed to rashness. Wilding lodged at Covent Garden, in a house recommended to him by Colonel Danvers, and there, an outlaw himself, he threw himself with a will into his task. He heard of the burning of Monmouth's declaration by the common hangman at the Royal Exchange, and of the bill passed by the Commons to make it treason for any to assert that Lucy Walters was married to the late king. He attended meetings at the Bull's Head, in Bishopsgate, where he met Disney and Danvers, Peyton and Locke. But though they talked and argued at prodigious length, they did naught besides. Danvers, who was their hope in town, definitely refused to have a hand in anything that was not properly organized, and in common with the others urged that they should wait until Cheshire had risen, as was reported that it must. Meanwhile, troops had gone west under Kirke and Churchill, and the Parliament had voted nearly 500,000 for the putting down of the rebellion. London was flung into a fever of excitement by the news that was reaching it. The position was not quite as Monmouth's advisers, before coming over from Holland, had represented that it would be. They had thought that out of fear of tumults about his own person, King James would have been compelled to keep near him what troops he had, sparing none to be sent against Monmouth. This King James had not done. He had all but emptied London of soldiery, and, considering the general disaffection, no moment could have been more favorable than this for a rising in London itself. The confusion that must have resulted from the recalling of troops would have given Monmouth not only a mighty grip of the West, but would have heartened those who, like Sunderland himself, were sitting on the wall, to declare themselves for the Protestant champion. This Wilding saw, and almost frenziedly did he urge it upon Danvers that all London needed at the moment was a resolute leader. But the colonel still held back. Indeed, he had neither truth nor valor. He was timid, and used deceit to mask his timidity. He urged frivolous reasons for inaction, and when Wilding waxed impatient with him, he suggested that Wilding himself should head the rising if he were so confident of its success. And Wilding would have done it, but that, being unknown in London, he had no reason to suppose that men would flock to him if he raised the Duke's banner. Later, when the excitement grew and rumors ran through town that Monmouth had now a following of 20,000 men, and that the king's forces were falling back before him, and discontent was rife at the commissioning of Catholic lords to levy troops, Wilding again pressed the matter upon Danvers. Surely no moment could be more propitious. But again he received the same answer, that Danvers had lacked time to organize matters sufficiently, that the Duke's coming had taken him by surprise. Lastly came the news that Monmouth had been crowned at Taunton amid the wildest enthusiasm, and that there were now in England 2 men, each of whom called himself King James II. This was the excuse that Danvers needed to be rid of a business he had not the courage to transact to a finish. He swore that he washed his hands of Monmouth's affairs, that the latter had broken faith with him and the promise he had made him in having himself proclaimed king. He protested that Monmouth had done ill, and prophesied that his act would alienate from him the numerous Republicans who, like Danvers, had hitherto looked to him for the country's salvation. Wilding himself was appalled that the news from Monmouth was indeed going further than men had been given to understand. Nevertheless, for his own sake, in very self-defense now, if out of no motives of loyalty to the Duke, he must urge forward the fortunes of this man. He had high words with Danvers, and the 2 might quarrel before long, but for the sudden arrest of Disney, which threw Danvers into such a panic that he fled incontinently, abandoning in body, as he already appeared to have abandoned in spirit, the Monmouth cause. The arrest of Disney struck a chill into Wilding. From his lodging at Covent Garden, he had communicated cautiously with Sunderland a few days after his arrival, building upon certain information he had received from the Duke at parting as to Sunderland's attachment to the cause. He had carefully chosen his moment for making this communication, having a certain innate mistrust of a man who so obviously, as Sunderland, was running with the hare and hunting with the hounds. He had sent a letter to the Secretary of State when London was agog with the Axminster affair and the tale, of which Sir Edward Phelps wrote to Colonel Berkeley as the shamefulest story that you ever heard, of how Albemarle's forces and the Somerset militia had run before Monmouth in spite of their own overwhelming numbers. This promised ill for James, particularly when it was perceived as perceived it was, that this running away was not all cowardice, not all the shamefulest story that Phelps accounted it. It was an expression of goodwill towards Monmouth on the part of the militia of the West, and it was confidently expected that the next news would be that these men who had decamped before him would presently be found to have ranged themselves under his banner. Sunderland had given no sign that he had received Wilding's communication, and Wilding drew his own contemptuous conclusions of the Secretary of State's cautious policy. It was a fortnight later, when London was settling down again from the diversion of excitement created by the news of Argyle's defeat in Scotland, before Mr. Wilding attempted to approach Sunderland again. He awaited a favorable opportunity, and this he had when London was thrown into consternation by the alarming news of the Duke of Somerset's urgent demand for reinforcements. Unless he had them, he declared, the whole country was lost, as he could not get the militia to stand, whilst Lord Stawell's regiment were all fled and mostly gone over to the rebels at Bridgewater. This was grave news, but it was followed in a few days by graver. The affair at Phillips Norton was exaggerated by report into a wholesale defeat of the loyal army, and it was reported on, apparently, such good authority that it received credence in quarters that might have waited for official news, that the Duke of Albemarle had been slain by the militia, which had mutinied and deserted to Monmouth. It was while this news was going round that Sunderland, in a moment of panic, at last vouchsafed an answer to Mr. Wilding's letters, and he vouchsafed it in person, just as Wilding, particularly since Disney's arrest, was beginning to lose all hope. He came one evening to Mr. Wilding's lodgings in Covent Garden, unattended and closely muffled, and he remained closeted with the Duke's ambassador for nigh upon an hour, at the end of which he entrusted Mr. Wilding with a letter for the Duke, very brief but entirely to the point, which expressed Monmouth's most devoted servant. "You may well judge, sir," he had said at parting, "that this is not such a letter as I should entrust to any man." Mr. Wilding had bowed gravely, and gravely he had expressed himself sensible of the exceptional honor his lordship did him by such a trust. "And I depend upon you, sir, as you are a man of honor, to take such measures as will ensure against its falling into any but the hands for which it is intended. As I am a man of honor, you may depend upon me," Mr. Wilding solemnly promised. "Will your lordship give me 3 lines above your signature that will save me from molestation? Thus you will facilitate the preservation of this letter." "I had already thought of that," was Sunderland's answer, and he placed before Mr. Wilding 3 lines of writing signed and sealed which enjoined all, straitly, in the king's name to suffer the bearer to pass and repass, and to offer him no hindrance. On that they shook hands and parted, Sunderland to return to Whitehall in his obedience to the King James, whom he was ready to betray as soon as he saw profit for himself in the act. Mr. Wilding to return to Somerset to the King James, in whom his faith was scant, indeed, but with whom his fortunes were irrevocably bound up. Meanwhile, Monmouth was back in Bridgewater, his second occupation of which town was not being looked upon with unmixed favor. The inhabitants had suffered enough already from his first visit. His return there, after the Phillips Norton affair, which such grossly exaggerated reports had reached London, and which, in point of fact, had been little better than a drawn battle, had been looked upon with dread by some, with disfavor by others, and with dismay by not a few who viewed in this an augury of failure. Now Sir Rowland Blake, who since the pursuit of Mr. Wilding entrenched on the occasion of their flight from Taunton had, in spite of his failure on that occasion, been more or less in the service of Albemarle and the loyal army, saw in this indisposition towards Monmouth of so many of Bridgewater's inhabitants great possibilities of profit to himself. He was at Lupton House, the guest of his friend Richard Westmacott, and the open suitor of Ruth, entirely ignoring the circumstance that she was nominally the wife of Mr. Wilding. This to the infinite chagrin of Miss Horton, who saw all her scheming likely to go for nothing. In his heart of hearts, it was a matter of not the slightest consequence to Sir Rowland whether James Stuart or James Scott occupied the throne of England. His own affairs gave him more than enough to think of, and these disturbances in the West were very welcome to him, since they rendered difficult any attempt to trace him on the part of his London creditors. It happens, however, very commonly that enmity to an individual will lead to enmity to the cause which that individual espouses. Thus may it have been with Sir Rowland. His hatred of Wilding and his keen desire to see Wilding destroyed had made him a zealous partisan of the loyal cause. Richard Westmacott, easily swayed and overborne by the town rake, whose vices made him seem to Richard the embodiment of all that is splendid and enviable in man, had become practically the baronet's tool, now that he had abandoned Monmouth's cause. Sir Rowland had not considered it beneath the dignity of his name and station to discharge in Bridgewater certain functions that made him more or less a spy, and so reliable had been the information he had sent Feversham and Albemarle during Monmouth's first occupation of the town, that he had won by now their complete confidence. The second occupation and its unpopularity with many of those who earlier, if lukewarm, had been partisans of the Duke, swelled the number of loyally inclined people in Bridgewater, and suddenly inspired Sir Rowland with a scheme by which at a blow he might snuff out the rebellion. This scheme involved the capture of the Duke, and the reward of success should mean far more to Blake than the £5,000 at which the value of the Duke's head had already been fixed by Parliament. He needed a tool for this, and he even thought of Westmacott and Lupton House, but afterwards referred to Mr. Nullington, who was in better case to assist him. This Nullington, an exceedingly prosperous merchant and one of the richest men perhaps in the whole west of England, looked with extreme disfavor upon Monmouth, whose advent had paralyzed his industries to an extent that was costing him a fine round sum of money weekly. He was now in alarm lest the town of Bridgewater should be made to pay dearly for having harbored the Protestant Duke. He had no faith whatever in the Protestant Duke's ultimate prevailing, and that he, as one of the town's most prominent and prosperous citizens, might be amongst the heaviest sufferers in spite of his neutrality. This neutrality he observed because it was hardly safe in that disaffected town for a man to proclaim himself a loyalist. To him Sir Roland expounded his audacious plan. He sought out the merchant in his handsome mansion on the night of that Friday which had witnessed Monmouth's return, and the merchant, honored by the visit of this gallant, ignorant as he was of the gentleman's fame in town, placed himself entirely and instantly at his disposal, though the hour was late. Sounding him carefully, and finding the fellow most amenable to any scheme that should achieve the salvation of his purse and industries, Blake boldly laid his plan before him. Startled at first, Mr. Nullington, upon considering it, became so enthusiastic that he hailed Sir Roland as his deliverer and heartily promised his cooperation. Indeed, it was Mr. Nullington who was himself to take the first step. Well pleased with his evening's work, Sir Roland went home to Lupton House and to bed. In the morning, he broached the matter to Richard. He had all the vanity of the inferior, not only to lessen the appearance of his inferiority, but to clothe himself in a mantle of importance. And it was his vanity urged him to acquaint Richard with his plans in the very presence of Ruth. They had broken their fast, and they still lingered in the dining room, the largest and most important room in Lupton House. It was cool and pleasant here in contrast to the heat of the July sun, which, following upon the late wet weather, beat fiercely on the lawn, the window doors of which stood open. The cloth had been raised, and Diana and her mother had lately left the room. Ruth, in the window seat at a small oval table, was arranging a cluster of roses in an old bronze bowl. Sir Roland, his stiff short figure carefully dressed in a suit of brown camlet, his fair wig very carefully curled, occupied a tall-backed armchair near the empty fireplace. Richard, perched on the table's edge, swung his shapely legs idly backwards and forwards and cogitated upon a pretext to call for a morning draught of last October's ale. Ruth completed her task with the roses and turned her eyes upon her brother. "You are not looking well, Richard," she said, which was true enough, for much hard drinking was beginning to set its stamp on Richard, and young as he was, his insipidly fair face began to display a bloatedness that was exceedingly unhealthy. "Oh, I am well enough," he answered almost peevishly, for these allusions to his looks were becoming more frequent than he savored. "Gad!" cried Sir Roland's deep voice. "You'll need to be well. I have work for you tomorrow, Dick." Dick did not appear to share his enthusiasm. "I am sick of the work you discover for us, Roland," he answered ungraciously. But Blake showed no resentment. "Maybe you'll find the present task more to your taste. If it's deeds of daring do you pine for, I am the man to satisfy you." He smiled grimly, his bold gray eyes glancing across at Ruth, who was observing him, listening. Richard sneered, but offered him no encouragement to proceed. "I see," said Blake, "that I shall have to tell you the whole story before you'll credit me." "Shall have it, then, but—" and he checked on the word, his face growing serious, his eye wandering to the door. "I would not have it overheard, not for a king's ransom," which was more literally true than he may have intended it to be. Richard looked over his shoulder carelessly at the door. "We have no eavesdroppers," he said, and his voice bespoke his contempt of the gravity of this news of which Sir Roland made so much in anticipation. He was acquainted with Sir Roland's ways and the importance of them. "What are you considering?" he inquired. "To end the rebellion," answered Blake, his voice cautiously lowered. Richard laughed outright. "There are several others considering that, notably His Majesty King James, the Duke of Albemarle, and the Earl of Feversham, yet they don't appear to achieve it. It is in that particular," said Blake complacently, "that I shall differ from them." He turned to Ruth, eager to engage her in the conversation, to flatter her by including her in the secret. Knowing the loyalist principles she entertained, he had no reason to fear that his plans could other than meet her approval. "What do you say, Mistress Ruth?" Presuming upon his friendship with her brother, he had taken to calling her by that name in preference to the other which he could not bring himself to give her. "Is it not an object worthy of a gentleman's endeavor? If you can save so many poor people from encompassing their ruin by following that rash young man, the Duke of Monmouth, you will indeed be doing a worthy deed." Blake rose and made her a leg. "Madam," said he, "had aught been wanting to cement my resolve, your words would supply it to me. My plan is simplicity itself. I propose to capture Monmouth and his principal agents, and deliver them over to the king. And that is all." "A mere nothing," croaked Richard. "Could more be needed?" quoth Blake. "Once the rebel army is deprived of its leaders, it will melt and dissolve of itself. Once the Duke is in the hands of his enemies, there will be nothing left to fight for. Is it not shrewd? You are telling us the object rather than the plan, Ruth reminded him. If the plan is as good as the object. As good? He echoed, chuckling. You shall judge. And briefly he sketched for her the springe he was setting with the help of Mr. Nullington. Nullington is rich. The Duke is in straits for money. Nullington goes today to offer him £20,000, and the Duke is to do him the honor of supping at his house tomorrow night, to fetch the money. It is a reasonable request for Mr. Nullington to make under the circumstances, and the Duke dare not refuse it. But how will that advance your project? Ruth inquired, for Blake had paused again, thinking that the rest must be obvious. In Mr. Nullington's orchard, I propose to post a score or so of men well armed. Oh! I shall run no risk of betrayal by engaging Bridgewater folk. I'll get the fellows I need from General Feversham. We take Monmouth at supper, as quietly as may be, with what gentlemen happen to have accompanied him. We bind and gag the Duke, and we convey him with all speed and quiet out of Bridgewater. Feversham shall send a troop to await me a mile or so from the town on the road to Weston Zoyland. We shall join them with our captive, and thus convey him to the Royalist general. Could aught be simpler or more infallible? Richard had slipped from the table. He had changed his mind on the subject of the importance of the business Blake had in view. Excited by it, he clapped his friend on the back approvingly. A great plan, he cried. Is it not, Ruth? It should be the means of saving hundreds, perhaps thousands of lives, said she. And so it deserves to prosper. But what of the officers who may be with the Duke? She inquired. There are not likely to be many, half a dozen, say. We shall have to make short work of them, lest they should raise an alarm. He saw her glance clouding. That is the ugly part of the affair, he was quick to add, himself assuming a look of sadness. He sighed. What help is there? He asked. Better that those few should suffer than that. As you yourself have said, there should be some thousands of lives lost before this rebellion is put down. Besides, he continued, Monmouth's officers are far-seeing, ambitious men who have entered into this affair to promote their own personal fortunes. They are gamesters who have set their lives upon the board against a great prize, and they know it. But these other poor misguided people who have gone out to fight for liberty and religion, it is these whom I am striving to rescue. His words sounded fervent, his sentiments almost heroic. Ruth looked at him, and wondered had she misjudged him in the past. She sighed. Then she thought of Wilding. He was on the other side, but where was he? Rumor ran that he was dead, that he and Gray had quarreled at Lyme, and that Wilding had been killed as a result. Had it not been for Diana, who strenuously bade her attach no credit to these reports, she would readily have believed them. As it was she waited, wondering, thinking of him always as she had seen him on that day at Walford when he had taken his leave of her, and more than once, when she pondered the words he had said, the look that had invested his drooping eyes, she found herself with tears in her own. They welled up now, and she rose hastily to her feet. She looked a moment at Blake, who was watching her keenly, speculating upon this emotion of which she betrayed some sign, and wondering might not his heroism have touched her, for, as we have seen, he had arrayed a deed of excessive meanness, a deed worthy, almost, of the Iscariot, in the panoply of heroic achievement. I think, she said, that you are setting your hand to a very worthy and glorious enterprise, and I hope, nay, I am sure, that success must attend your efforts. He was still bowing his thanks when she passed out through the open window doors into the sunshine of the garden. Sir Rowland swung round upon Richard. A great enterprise, Dick, he cried. I may count upon you for one? Aye, said Dick, who had found at last a pretext that he needed. You may count on me. Pull the bell. We'll drink to the success of the venture. Chapter 17. Mr. Wilding's Return. The preparations to be made for the momentous coup Sir Rowland meditated were considerable. Mr. Nullington was yet to be concerted with and advised, and that done, Sir Rowland had to face the difficulty of eluding the Bridgewater guards and make his way to Feversham's camp at Somerton to enlist the general's cooperation to the extent that we have seen he looked for. That done, he was to return and ripen his preparations for the business he had undertaken. Nevertheless, in spite of all that lay before him, he did not find it possible to leave Lupton House without stepping out into the garden in quest of Ruth. Through the window, whilst he and Richard were at their ale, he had watched her between whiles, and had lingered, waiting, for Diana was with her, and it was not his wish to seek her whilst Diana was at hand. Speak with her, ere he went, he must. He was an opportunist, and now, he fondly imagined, was his opportunity. He had made that day, at last, a favorable impression upon Richard's sister. He had revealed himself in a heroic light, and egregiously misreading the emotion she had shown before withdrawing. He was satisfied that did he strike now, victory must attend him. He sighed his satisfaction and pleasurable anticipation. He had been wary and he had known how to wait, and now, it seemed to him, he was to be rewarded for his patience. Then he frowned, as another glance showed him that Diana still lingered with her cousin. He wished Diana at the devil. He had come to hate this fair-haired doll to whom he had once paid court. She was too continually in his way, a constant obstacle in his path, ever ready to remind Ruth of Anthony Wilding when Sir Rowland most desired Anthony Wilding to be forgotten. And in Diana's feelings towards himself such a change had been gradually wrought that she had come to reciprocate his sentiments, to hate him with all the bitter hatred into which love can be by scorn transmuted. At first her object in keeping Ruth's thoughts on Mr. Wilding, in pleading his cause, and seeking to present him in a favorable light to the lady whom he had constrained to become his wife, had been that he might stand a barrier between Ruth and Sir Rowland to the end that Diana might hope to see revived. Faute de mieux, since possible in no other way, the feelings at once Sir Rowland had professed for herself. The situation was rich in humiliations for poor, vain, foolishly crafty Diana, and these humiliations were daily rendered more bitter by Sir Rowland's unwavering courtship of her cousin, in spite of all that she could do. In the end, the poison of them entered her soul, corroded her sentiments towards him, dissolved the love she had borne him, and transformed it into venom. She would not have him now if he did penitence for his disaffection by going in sackcloth and crawling after her on his knees for a full 12-month. But neither should he have Ruth if she could thwart his purpose. On that she was resolved. Had she but guessed that he watched them from the windows, waiting for her to take her departure, she had lingered all the morning and all the afternoon if need be at Ruth's side. But being ignorant of the circumstance, believing that he had already left the house, she presently quitted Ruth to go indoors, and no sooner was she gone than there was Blake replacing her at Ruth's elbow. Mistress Wilding met him with unsmiling but not ungentle face. "Not yet gone, Sir Rowland?" she asked him, and a less sanguine man had been discouraged by the words. "It may be forgiven me that I tarry at such a time," said he, "when we consider that I go, perhaps, to return no more." It was an inspiration on his part to assume the role of a hero, going forth to a possible death. It invested him with noble, valiant pathos which could not, he thought, fail of its effect upon a woman's mind. But he looked in vain for a change of color, be it ever so slight, or a quickening of the breath. He found neither, though, indeed, her deep blue eyes seemed to soften as they observed him. "There is danger in this thing that you are undertaking," said she, between question and assertion. "It is not my wish to overstate it, yet I leave you to imagine what the risk may be." "It is a good cause," said she, thinking of the poor, deluded, humble folk that followed Monmouth's banner, whom Blake's fine action was to rescue from impending ruin and annihilation, "and surely heaven will be on your side." "We must prevail," cried Blake with kindling eye, and you had thought him a fanatic, not a miserable earner of blood money. "We must prevail, though some of us may pay dearly for the victory. I have a foreboding," he paused, sighed, then laughed and flung back his head, as if throwing off some weight that had oppressed him. It was admirably played. Nick Trenchard, had he observed it, might have envied the performance. And it took effect with her, this adding of a prospective martyr's crown to the hero's raiment he had earlier donned. It was a master touch worthy of one who was deeply learned, from a school of foul experience, in the secret ways that lead to a woman's favor. In a pursuit of this kind, there was no subterfuge too mean, no treachery too base for Sir Rowland Blake. "Will you walk, mistress?" he said, and she, feeling that it were an unkindness not to do his will, assented gravely. They moved down the sloping lawn, side by side, Sir Rowland leaning on his cane, bareheaded, his feather hat tucked under his arm. Before them the river's smooth expanse, swollen and yellow with the recent rains, glowed like a sheet of copper, so that it blurred the sight to look upon it long. A few steps they took with no word uttered. Then Sir Rowland spoke. "With this foreboding that is on me," said he, I could not go without seeing you, without saying something that I may never have another chance of saying, something that who knows? But for the emprise to which I am now, wedded you had never heard from me. He shot her a furtive, sidelong glance from under his heavy, beetling brows, and now, indeed, he observed a change ripple over the composure of her face like a sudden breeze across a sheet of water. The deep lace collar at her throat rose and fell, and her fingers toyed nervously with a ribbon of her gray bodice. She recovered in an instant, and threw up entrenchments against the attack she saw he was about to make. "You exaggerate, I trust," said she. "Your forebodings will be proved groundless. You will return safe and sound from this venture, as indeed I hope you may." That was his cue. "You hope it?" he cried, arresting his step, turning, and imprisoning her left hand in his right. "You hope it? If you hope for my return I will. But unless I know that you'll have some welcome for me such as I desire from you, I think," his voice quivered cleverly, "I think perhaps it were well if my forebodings were not as groundless as you say they are. Tell me, Ruth." But she interrupted him. It was high time, she thought. Her face, he saw, was flushed. Her eyes had hardened somewhat. Calmly, she disengaged her hand. "What is you mean?" she asked. "Speak, Sir Roland. Speak plainly, that I may give you a plain answer." It was a challenge in which another man had seen how hopeless was his case, and, accepting defeat, had made as orderly a retreat as still was possible. But Sir Roland, stricken in his vanity, went headlong on to utter rout. "Since you ask me in such terms, I will be plain indeed," he answered her. "I mean," he almost quailed before the look that met him from her intrepid eyes. "Do you not see my meaning, Ruth?" "That which I see," said she, "I do not believe, and as I would not wrong you by any foolish imaginings, I would have you plain with me." Yet the egregious fool went on. "And why should you not believe your senses?" he asked her, between anger and entreaty. "Is it wonderful that I should love you? Is it—" "Stop." She drew back a pace from him. There was a moment's silence, during which it seemed she gathered her forces to destroy him, and in the spirit, he bowed his head before the coming storm. Then, with a sudden relaxing of the stiffness her lissom figure had assumed, "I think you had better leave me, Sir Roland," she advised him. She half turned and moved a step away. He followed with lowering glance, his upper lip lifting and laying bare his powerful teeth. In a stride, he was beside her. "Do you hate me, Ruth?" he asked her hoarsely. "Why should I hate you?" she counter-questioned, sadly. "I do not even dislike you," she continued in a more friendly tone, adding, as if by way of explaining the phenomenon, "You are my brother's friend, but I am disappointed in you, Sir Roland. You had, I know, no intention of offering me disrespect, and yet it is what you have done." "As how?" he asked. "Knowing me another's wife," he broke in tempestuously. "A mock marriage, if it is but that scruples stand between us." "I think there is more," she answered him. "You compel me to hurt you. I do so as the surgeon does, that I may heal you." "Why?" "Thanks for nothing," he made answer, unable to repress a sneer. Then, checking himself and resuming the hero-martyr posture, "I go, mistress," he told her sadly, "and if I lose my life tonight or tomorrow in this affair—" "I shall pray for you," said she, for she had found him out at last, perceived the nature of the bow he sought to draw across her heartstrings, and, having perceived it, contempt awoke in her. He had attempted to move her by unfair, insidious means. He fell back, crimson from chin to brow. He stifled the wrath that welled up, threatening to choke him. He was a short-necked man of the sort, as Trenchard had once reminded him, that falls a prey to apoplexy, and surely he was never nearer it than at that moment. He made her a profound bow, bending himself almost in two before her in a very irony of deference. Then, drawing himself up again, he turned and left her. The plot, which with some pride he had hatched and the reward he looked to cull from it, were now to his soul as ashes to his lips. What could it profit him to destroy Monmouth, so that Anthony Wilding lived? For whether she loved Wilding or not, she was Wilding's wife. Wilding, nominally at least, was master of that which Sir Roland coveted. Not her heart, indeed, but her ample fortune. Wilding had been a stumbling block to him since he had come to Bridgewater. But for Wilding he might have run a smooth course. He was still fool enough to hug that dear illusion to his soul. Somewhere in England, if not dead already, this Wilding lurked, an outlaw whom any might shoot down at sight. Sir Rowland swore he would not rest until he knew that Anthony Wilding cumbered the earth no more, leastways, not the surface of it. He went forth to seek Nullington. The merchant had sent his message to the rebel king, and had word in answer that his majesty would be graciously pleased to sup at Mr. Nullington's at 9 o'clock on the following evening, attended by a few gentlemen of his immediate following. Sir Rowland received the news with satisfaction, and sighed to think that Mr. Wilding, still absent heaven knew where, would not be of the party. It was reported that on the Monday Monmouth was to march to Gloucester, hoping there to be joined by his Cheshire friends, so that it seemed Sir Rowland had not matured his plan a day too soon. He got to horse, and contriving to win out of Bridgewater, rode off to Somerton to concert with Lord Feversham concerning the men he would need for his undertaking. That night Richard made free talk of the undertaking to Diana and to Ruth, loving, as does the pusillanimous, to show himself engaged in daring enterprises. Emulating his friend Sir Rowland, he held forth with prolixity upon the great service he was to do the state, and Ruth, listening to him, was proud of his zeal, the sincerity of which it never entered her mind to doubt. Diana listened too, but without allusions concerning Master Richard, and she kept her conclusions to herself. During the afternoon of the morrow, which was Sunday, Sir Rowland returned to Bridgewater, his mission to Feversham entirely successful and all preparations made. He completed his arrangements, and towards 8 o'clock that night the 20 men sent by Feversham, they had slipped singly into the town, began to muster in the orchard at the back of Mr. Nullington's house. It was just about that same hour that Mr. Wilding, saddle-worn and dust-clogged in every pore, rode into Bridgewater and made his way to the sign of the Ship in the High Street, overlooking the cross where Trenchard was lodged. His friend was absent, possibly gone with his men to the sermon Ferguson was preaching to the army in the castle fields. Having put up his horse, Mr. Wilding, all dusty as he was, repaired straight to the castle to report himself to Monmouth. He was informed that his majesty was in council. Nevertheless, urging that his news was of importance, he begged to be instantly announced. After a pause, he was ushered into a lofty, roomy chamber where, in the fading daylight, King Monmouth sat in council with Grey and Wade, Matthew, Speke, Ferguson, and others. At the foot of the table stood a sturdy country fellow, unknown to Wilding. It was Godfrey, the spy, who was to act as their guide across Sedgemoor that night. For the matter that was engaging them just then was the completion of their plans for the attack that was to be made that very night upon Feversham's unprepared camp, a matter which had been resolved during the last few hours as an alternative preferable to the retreat towards Gloucester that had at first been intended. Wilding was shocked at the change that had been wrought in Monmouth's appearance during the few weeks since last he had seen him. His face was thin, pale, and haggard. His eyes were more somber, and beneath them there were heavy, dark stains of sleeplessness and care. His very voice, when presently he spoke, seemed to have lost the musical timbre that had earlier distinguished it. It was grown harsh and rasping, disappointment after disappointment, set down to ill luck, but in reality the fruit of incompetence, had served to sour him. The climax had been reached in the serious desertions after the Phillips Norton fight, and the flight of Paymaster Goodenough with the funds for the campaign. The company sat about the long oak table on which a map was spread, and Colonel Wade was speaking when Wilding entered. On his appearance, Wade ceased, and every eye was turned upon the messenger from London. Ferguson, fresh from his sermon, sat with elbows resting on the table, his long chin supported by his hands, his eyes gleaming sharply under the shadow of his wig, which was pulled down in front to the level of his eyebrows. It was the Duke who addressed Mr. Wilding, and the latter's keen ears were quick to catch the bitterness that underlay his words. "We are glad to see you, sir. We had not looked to do so again." "Not looked to do so? Your Grove?" "Majesty," he echoed, plainly not understanding, and it was observed that he stumbled over the Duke's new title. "We had imagined that the pleasures of the town were claiming your entire attention." Wilding looked from one to the other of the men before him, and on the face of all he saw a gravity that amounted to disapproval of him. "The pleasures of the town," said he, frowning, and again, "the pleasures of the town? There is something in this that I fear I do not understand. Do you bring us news that London has risen?" asked Grey suddenly. "I would I could," said Wilding, smiling wistfully. "Is it a laughing matter?" quoth Grey angrily. "A smiling matter, my lord," answered Wilding, nettled. "Your lordship will observe that I did but smile." "Mr. Wilding," said Monmouth darkly, "we are not pleased with you." "In that case," returned Wilding, more and more irritated, "your majesty expected of me more than was possible to any man." "You have wasted your time in London, sir," the Duke explained. "We sent you thither counting upon your loyalty and devotion to ourselves. What have you done?" "As much as a man could," Wilding began, when Grey again interrupted him. "As little as a man could," he answered. "Were his grace not the most foolishly clement prince in Christendom, a halter would be your reward for the fine things you have done in London." Mr. Wilding stiffened visibly. His long white face grew set, and his slanting eyes looked wicked. He was not a man readily moved to anger, but to be greeted in such words as these by one who constituted himself the mouthpiece of him for whom Wilding had incurred ruin was more than he could bear with equanimity. That the risks to which he had exposed himself in London, where indeed he had been in almost hourly expectation of arrest and such short shrift as poor Disney had, should be acknowledged in such terms as these, was something that turned him almost sick with disgust. To what manner of men had he leagued himself? He looked Grey steadily between the eyes. "I mind me of an occasion on which such a charge of foolish clemency might, indeed, and with greater justice, have been levelled against his majesty," said he, and his calm was almost terrible. His lordship grew pale at the obvious allusion to Monmouth's mild treatment of him for his cowardice at Bridport, and his eyes were as baleful as Wilding's own at that moment. But before he could speak, Monmouth had already answered Mr. Wilding. "You are wanting in respect to us, sir," he admonished him. Mr. Wilding bowed to rebuke, in a submission that seemed ironical. The blood mounted slowly to Monmouth's cheeks. "Perhaps," put in Wade, who was anxious for peace, "Mr. Wilding has some explanation to offer us of his failure." His failure? They took too much for granted. Stitched in the lining of his boot was a letter from the Secretary of State. To have achieved that was surely to have achieved something. "I thank you, sir, for supposing it," answered Wilding, his voice hard with self-restraint. "I have indeed an explanation." "We will hear it," said Monmouth condescendingly, and Grey sneered, thrusting out his bloated lips. "I have to offer the explanation that your majesty is served in London by cowards, self-sufficient and self-important cowards who have hindered me in my task instead of helping me. I refer particularly to Colonel Danvers." Grey interrupted him. "You have a rare effrontery. Sir, by God, do you dare call Danvers a coward?" "It is not I who so call him, but the facts. Colonel Danvers has run away." "Danvers gone?" cried Ferguson, voicing the consternation of all. Wilding shrugged and smiled. Grey's eye was offensively upon him. He elected to answer the challenge of that glance. "He has followed the illustrious example set him by other of your majesty's devoted followers," said Wilding. Grey rose suddenly. This was too much. "I'll not endure it from this knave," he cried, appealing to Monmouth. Monmouth wearily waved him to a seat, but Grey disregarded command. "What have I said that should touch your lordship?" asked Wilding, and, smiling sardonically, he looked into Grey's eyes. "It is not what you have said. It is what you have inferred." "And to call me knave," said Wilding in a mocking horror. The repression of his anger lent him a rare bitterness, an almost devilishly subtle manner of expressing wordlessly what was passing in his mind. There was not one present but gathered from his utterance of those 5 words that he did not hold Grey worthy the honor of being called to account for that offensive epithet. He made just an exclamatory protest, such as he might have made had a woman applied the term to him. Grey turned from him slowly to Monmouth. "It might be well," said he, in his turn controlling himself at last, "to place Mr. Wilding under arrest." Mr. Wilding's manner quickened on the instant from passive to active anger. "Upon what charge, sir?" he demanded sharply. In truth, it was the only thing wanting that, after all that he had undergone, he should be arrested. His eyes were upon the Duke's melancholy face, and his anger was such that in that moment he vowed that if Monmouth acted upon the suggestion of Grey's, he should not have so much as the consolation of Sunderland's letter. "You have been wanting in respect to us, sir," the Duke answered him. He seemed able to do little more than repeat himself. "You returned from London empty-handed. your task unaccomplished, and instead of becoming contrition, you hector here before us in this manner." He shook his head. "We are not pleased with you, Mr. Wilding." "But your grace," exclaimed Wilding, "is it my fault that your London agents have failed to organize the rising? That rising should have taken place, and it would have taken place had your Majesty been more ably represented there." "You were there, Mr. Wilding," said Gray with heavy sarcasm. "Would it no be better to leave Mr. Wilding's affair until afterwards?" suggested Ferguson at that moment. "It is already past 8, your Majesty, and there be still some details of this attack to settle that your officers may prepare for it, whilst Mr. Nullington awaits your Majesty to supper at 9. "True," said Monmouth, ever ready to take a solution offered by another. "We will confer with you again later, Mr. Wilding." Wilding bowed, accepting his dismissal. "Before I go, your Majesty, there are certain things I would report," he began. "You have heard, sir," Gray broke in. "Not now. This is not the time." "Indeed, no. This is not the time, Mr. Wilding," echoed the Duke. Wilding set his teeth in the intensity of his vexation. "What I have to tell your Majesty is of importance," he exclaimed, and Monmouth seemed to waver, whilst Gray looked disdainful unbelief of the importance of any communication Wilding might have to make. "We have little time, your Majesty," Ferguson reminded Monmouth. "Perhaps," put in friendly Wade, "your Majesty might see Mr. Wilding at Mr. Nullington's." "Is it really necessary?" quoth Gray. This treatment of him inspired Mr. Wilding with malice. The mere mention of Sunderland's letter would have changed their tone, but he elected by no such word to urge the importance of his business. It should be entirely as Monmouth should elect or be constrained by these gentlemen about his council table. "It would serve 2 purposes," said Wade, whilst Monmouth still considered. "Your Majesty will be none too well attended, your officers having this other matter to prepare for. Mr. Wilding would form another to swell your escort of gentlemen." "I think you are right, Colonel Wade," said Monmouth. "We sup at Mr. Nullington's at 9 o'clock, Mr. Wilding. We shall expect you to attend us there." "Lieutenant Cragg," said his grace to the young officer who had admitted Wilding, and who had remained at attention by the door, "you may reconduct Mr. Wilding." Wilding bowed, his lips tight to keep in the anger that craved expression. Then, without another word spoken, he turned and departed. "An insolent, overbearing knave," was Gray's comment upon him after he had left the room. "Let us attend to this, your lordship," said Speke, tapping the map. "Time presses." And he invited Wade to continue the matter that Wilding's advent had interrupted.